Clara Whitlock drove the axe into the fence post so hard the wood split clean through. Then she sat down in the Kansas dirt, pressed her hands against her knees, and did not cry. She had already cried everything out, widowed at 27. Drowning in debt. Carrying a body the whole town mocked and a ranch the bank wanted to steal before summer ended. And now the fence was falling apart too, so am I, she thought. She just did not know yet that a broken man on a tired horse was about to ride into her life and wreck everything she thought she understood about surviving alone. If this story speaks to your heart, subscribe to this channel and follow along until the very last word. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now let's begin. The summer of 1884 came to Larkspur County, Kansas like a punishment. The heat arrived first, pressing down on the plains with the weight of something personal, something that wanted to break whatever had survived the winter. Then came the dry weeks, stretching one into the next, until the creek behind the Whitlock Ranch ran slow and brown and the pasture grass turned the color of old rope. By July, the fence line that ran half a mile along the eastern edge of the property had begun to collapse in long, defeated sections, posts leaning into each other like men who had given up standing on their own. Clara Whitlock was the only one left who noticed. She walked that fence line every morning before the sun had fully cleared the horizon, and every morning she cataloged the damage the way a person catalogs grief methodically, quietly, with the particular numbness that comes from having already felt too much. 3 posts down on the north corner, 2 more rails split along the middle section. The wire gone slack and dragging in the dirt where the cattle had pushed against it until it simply stopped resisting. She carried a notebook. She wrote everything down in it. Not because writing it down fixed anything, but because writing it down meant she had not stopped paying attention, and as long as Clara Whitlock was paying attention, the ranch was still hers. She was 27 years old, she was a widow, and she was the largest woman in Larkspur County, a fact the town had made certain she never forgot. Clara had come to accept the weight of her own body, the way she had come to accept the Kansas heat. It was simply the condition under which she lived. She was soft-figured and broad-shouldered, with round cheeks that colored easily in the sun, and hands that had grown calloused in the 2 years since her husband Thomas died. She wore her dark hair pinned back under a sun-worn hat, and her dresses, practical cotton, never fashionable, were always covered by the same faded brown working apron that had been her mother's before it was hers. The townspeople of Larkspur had theories about Clara Whitlock. They had theories about everything in a small county where gossip traveled faster than weather, but their theories about Clara were delivered with a particular kind of comfortable cruelty, the kind that disguises itself as concern. She heard them at the general store, at the feed merchants, in the spaces between polite words when she went to conduct business. That poor woman, they said, trying to run a ranch by herself. A woman her size, they said, in that heat. Thomas left her in quite a position, they said. It's only a matter of time. They said it with sighs. They said it with small sympathetic shakes of their heads. They said it as though Clara were not standing right there in front of them, carrying 50 pounds of flour and negotiating a credit extension with a composure that most of them could not have matched on their best day. She had learned not to answer. Answering required energy she did not have, and every ounce of energy Clara possessed belonged to the ranch. Thomas Whitlock had loved that land, the way some men love a thing they made with their own hands, which was exactly what it was, 200 acres of Kansas plain that he and his father had carved out of nothing before Clara ever arrived. When he died of fever that came on fast in November and was finished by December, brutal in its efficiency, he left Clara the deed, the debts, a half-collapsed barn, and a herd of cattle that needed to be managed by someone who had spent the previous 5 years learning how from a husband who had not planned to leave so soon. The bank held a note on the property. The note had a due date. Preston Voss knew both of those facts better than anyone. Preston Voss was the wealthiest cattle rancher in Larkspur County, a man of 50 with gray at his temples and the quiet, patient confidence of someone who had learned that money, applied with sufficient patience, tended to solve most problems eventually. He had offered to buy Clara's land twice since Thomas died. Both times she had refused him. Both times he had smiled the same small, accommodating smile and told her the offer would remain open. Clara understood what the smile meant. It meant, "I can wait longer than you can hold on." She went home from each of those conversations and worked twice as hard the following week, which was the only language of defiance she trusted. That was the condition of the Whitlock Ranch when Ethan Calloway rode into it on a gray July morning, with nothing but a worn saddle, a toolbox strapped behind him, and the specific posture of a man who had spent years teaching himself not to look too directly at anything he might want to stay for. He saw the fence first. Of course he saw the fence first. Ethan Calloway noticed broken things the way other men noticed weather automatically, without choosing to. It was the trained instinct of a man who had spent a decade moving from county to county, ranch to ranch, town to town, fixing what other people had let fall apart. Barns, fences, wagon wheels, roof beams. He did not fix them because he loved the work, though he was exceptionally good at it. He fixed them because fixing things required a fixed duration. 6 weeks, 8 weeks, a season at most. Then he moved on before anything could require more of him than his hands. He pulled his horse to a stop at the end of the fence line and looked at the damage for a long moment. "This fence is falling apart," he said to no one in particular. "So am I." He turned. Clara was standing at the gate, her notebook in one hand and a fence post gauge in the other, watching him with the measured, unsurprised expression of a woman who had long since stopped being startled by anything the morning brought her. Sweat had gathered at her temple and along the edge of her collar. The sun had already been up an hour, and she had already been working for 2. She looked at the fence, then at him, then at the toolbox behind his saddle. "Fix whichever one you can," she said. Ethan dismounted. He was 34, lean in the way that came from years of hard work rather than deliberate effort. With a jaw that had not seen a proper razor in 4 or 5 days and dark eyes that had the habit of going still and careful when he was deciding something. He tipped his hat. It was an automatic gesture, the reflexive courtesy of a man raised to perform certain courtesies, regardless of what was happening inside him. "Ethan Calloway," he said, "I heard in town you might have fence work." "I have 6 months of fence work," Clara said. "I can pay fair." "Not generous, but fair. Fair is what I ask for." She studied him the way she studied everything, with the calm, direct attention of someone who could not afford to make mistakes in judgment. She looked at his hands. They were the hands of someone who had been working since before he should have been, rough-knuckled and sure. "You staying in town?" "Not yet. There's a bunkhouse," she said. "It's small. The roof was patched last autumn, holds water mostly. I can offer meals and a wage. That suits me." Clara nodded once, the way a woman who has made a practical decision nods without relief and without regret. "The worst section is the north corner," she said, turning back toward the fence line. "Start there." Ethan started there. What he found over the course of that first morning was not just a fence in need of repair. It was a fence that had been struggling to hold itself together for years, maintained in small, desperate patchages by someone working alone without sufficient help, using materials purchased on a limited budget, often in the wrong season. Whoever had been managing this fence had been doing it with intelligence and effort, but without enough of either resource that mattered most: time and labor. He worked through the morning without speaking much. That was his way. Clara worked the opposite fence line, mending the wire sections with a pair of pliers, and the efficient, practiced movements of someone who had learned by doing rather than by being taught. He watched her when he thought she was not looking. She was not fragile. That was the first thing he understood. He had assumed, from the way she had spoken at the gate, that she might have some of the delicacy that sometimes comes packaged with a person's exhaustion. He had been wrong. Clara Whitlock moved with the particular heaviness and purpose of a person who has stopped caring what their movement looks like and started caring only about what it accomplishes. She was not fast, but she was relentless. By noon she had mended more wire than he expected. She brought lunch out to the fence line on a tin tray: bread, cold beans, 2 cups of water, and they sat on opposite sides of a fence rail and ate without ceremony. How long have you been running this place alone? Ethan asked. 2 years, Clara said, since December of '81. Your husband? Fever. She said it plainly without searching for softer language. It was fast, which I understand is supposed to be a mercy. She paused. I have not yet decided if I agree. Ethan did not say he was sorry. She had probably heard it said enough times that it had emptied itself of meaning. Instead, he said, you kept the herd through. Yes. That's not easy alone. It is not. He drank his water. She ate her bread in small measured bites. The north corner will need 8 new posts, he said. I can cut them from the timber lot, if you have one. East side of the property. Thomas planted fast-growth cedar 10 years ago. Take what you need. She paused. Don't take more than you need. I never do. That was the whole of their first conversation. But it established something, Ethan thought, riding back toward the timber lot in the afternoon. It established that Clara Whitlock was not the woman people in Larkspur County described when they spoke of her. They spoke of her with pity, as though she were someone being slowly overwhelmed. What he had seen was something else entirely. What he had seen was a woman who had made the decision quietly, privately, without asking anyone's permission to outlast the thing trying to break her. He was not sure he had ever met anyone who made that decision so cleanly. He cut the cedar posts until the light dropped. The bunkhouse was exactly as she described. Small, honest, functional. The roof had been patched with new shingles over older wood, and the seams were neat her work. He suspected, not a hired hand's. There was a cot, a wash basin, a single window facing east. It was the kind of shelter a person provides when they want to be decent but cannot afford to be generous, and Ethan respected it for exactly that reason. He lay on the cot and looked at the ceiling in the dark and thought about nothing on purpose, which was the particular skill of a man who had learned that thinking about certain things before sleep made the next morning harder to begin. He stayed through the end of the first week. The fence demanded it. Every section he repaired revealed another section requiring the same attention, and Ethan was the kind of man who could not stop halfway through a job without it sitting badly in him. A particular restlessness that did not resolve until the work was done correctly. He told himself that was why he stayed past the 3 days he originally planned. That was most of the reason. In the mornings before the heat built, Clara rose before dawn, and he could hear the sounds of her working from the bunkhouse, the clang of the water pump, the low murmur she used when speaking to the horses, the occasional precise knock of a tool being set down on wood. She was always already in motion when he came out. She never waited to be witnessed. He began rising earlier. Not to impress her. He was not built for that kind of theater. He rose earlier because the coolest hours were the best hours for the heaviest work. And also because, though he did not examine this reason closely, there was something steadying about beginning the day in the company of another person who was already fully committed to the morning. By the end of the second week, they had established something that neither of them named. A rhythm, a pair of people sharing a working day in the particular efficient silence of individuals who respect each other's competence without feeling the need to perform around it. Clara did not explain herself to him. Ethan did not explain himself to her. They met at the fence line in the morning, worked through the heat, ate meals that were practical rather than elaborate, and parted for the evening without ceremony. But the conversations grew, not because either of them decided to be more open. They grew the way water finds a path naturally, following the path of least resistance, filling in slowly. You track every expense in that notebook? Ethan asked one evening. Every wire, seed, repairs. Wages. Your wages are in there, I didn't ask. I know you didn't. She looked up from the ledger. My father kept records. He said a person who doesn't know exactly where they stand financially will never know when they're standing on solid ground. She touched the notebook's cover. Thomas was not a records man. I had to rebuild the accounts from memory and receipts after he died. Took me 3 months to understand what we actually owed. And it was a great deal. She said it the way she said most difficult things directly, without flinching from it. But it was not more than could be survived. Most people would have sold. Most people did not build this with their own hands, Clara said. I had nothing to do with the building, but I watched Thomas do it. I watched what it cost him. She closed the notebook. I will not hand that to Preston Voss because the ledger is uncomfortable. Ethan had been hearing the name Voss since the first day he arrived in Larkspur. He had heard it at the feed merchant, where the clerk had been carefully apologetic about Clara's credit terms, Mr. Voss prefers that his associates maintain certain standards in their lending practices. He had heard it from a neighboring rancher who came by to return a borrowed tool and lingered long enough to make it clear he admired Clara's determination, without quite committing to standing beside it. He had heard the name the way you hear a river, when you are still half a mile from it, present in the background, before you understand how large it is. Voss has reach, Ethan said. Voss has money, Clara said. In this county that is much the same thing. She set the notebook on the table. He has offered for this land twice. He will offer again. He is the kind of man who mistakes patience for strategy. And what do you call it? Patience, she said. He is simply patient in the wrong direction. She looked at Ethan. I intend to outlast him. Something moved in Ethan's chest when she said that. He recognized it a moment later as the specific feeling of being in the presence of someone who meant exactly what they said, which was rarer than people understood. He went back to the bunkhouse that night and did not try to think about nothing. By the third week, the north corner was rebuilt, and 3 sections of the middle fence had been replaced with fresh cedar posts that stood straight and solid in the Kansas dirt. Ethan had acquired the proper wire gauge from a supplier 2 towns over who did not fall under Voss's particular sphere of influence, and the wire was good taut and even strung with the care of a man who knows that a fence built correctly lasts, and a fence built carelessly must be rebuilt. Clara came to inspect the work on a Wednesday afternoon, walking the repaired line with her notebook and a practiced eye. She stopped at the north corner and put her hand on the post. Pressed it sideways with a firm testing pressure. The post did not move. She pressed harder. Nothing. These will hold, she said. They'll hold past either of us, Ethan said. She looked at him then, with an expression he had not seen on her face before. It was not gratitude exactly. It was something quieter and more complicated than gratitude. It was the expression of a person who has grown accustomed to being surprised by disappointment and is encountering the unfamiliar surprise of someone doing what they said they would do. Thank you, she said. It was 2 words. She said them like she meant them, which meant they cost her something, which meant they were worth more than 2 words. Thank the cedar, Ethan said. Good timber makes the job easier. She almost smiled at that, he noticed. That evening there was a storm predicted, not the kind that Larkspur would see in August, but a respectable thunderstorm with genuine lightning, and Clara spent 2 hours before dark securing the cattle and reinforcing the barn's east door, which had a hinge that swung loose in strong wind. Ethan helped without being asked. He took the opposite side of the barn and checked the roof battening while she worked below. When the storm came, it was loud and brief and did less damage than it threatened, which was the particular mercy of Kansas weather. It announced itself more violently than it followed through. They stood under the barn overhang and watched it pass. This happen often, Ethan asked. Every summer, Clara said. July and August are the worst months, for the fence. For everything. She watched the lightning split the sky somewhere beyond the creek. Thomas used to say Kansas weather has no patience for anything half-built. Has to be solid or it gets torn apart. Sounds like a man who understood fences. He understood land, she said. He understood what it asked of you and he was willing to give it. A pause. I sometimes think I understand it better now than I did when he was here. Because now I feel every part of it directly. She looked at the dark sky. There is no one between me and the thing, no buffer. Every problem lands on me first. Is that hard? Ethan asked. It was a simple question, and he was not sure why he asked it, except that she had said something true, and his instinct was to receive truth with the respect of an honest question. Yes, Clara said. It is the hardest thing I have ever done. She turned from the rain. But I have stopped waiting for it to become easier. I think I have just become someone who can carry harder things." He looked at her for a moment. She was looking at the rain. "How?" he asked. She considered this by deciding that I was not going to be defined by the people who expected me to fail. She said it quietly, without anger. "The tell what they say. About my size. About whether a woman like me can manage something like this." She looked at him. "I decided a long time ago that their opinion of what I was capable of was a great deal less interesting to me than proving them wrong." Ethan stood with that for a moment. He had spent 10 years moving from place to place, which he had told himself was a practical response to the practical problem of a man who could not afford to be rooted. That was the story. The real story was that he had made a mistake years ago, built a loading structure on a ranch in Missouri that had a flaw he had missed. A flaw that cost a man his left hand when the structure failed, and he had decided somewhere in the aftermath that the safest thing he could do with himself was not to stay anywhere long enough for his failures to compound. He fixed fences because fences were bounded. A fence had a beginning and an end. You could finish a fence. You could see when it was done and walk away from it, knowing exactly what you had built and exactly what remained. He could not look at Clara Whitlock standing in the rain beside her barn and say any of that out loud. But he heard it inside himself, clearly and without the usual static of avoidance. He had spent 10 years being very cautious about what he built. And the woman beside him had spent 2 years building everything she had left. In the 4th week, Preston Voss came to the ranch. He arrived on a fine horse, and with 2 of his ranch hands behind him, which was Voss's particular language for suggesting that he was a man of consequence without saying it directly. He wore a good hat and good boots, and had the careful courtesy of a man who knows how to make a conversation feel generous, while it is actually a negotiation. Clara met him at the gate. Ethan was working on the south fence line, close enough to hear without appearing to listen. "Mrs. Whitlock," Voss said, "you're looking well." "Mr. Voss," Clara said. The neutrality in her voice was a remarkable thing. It contained not a single edge that he could use, and not a single softness that he could exploit. "What brings you out? Neighborly visit," he said. "I heard you had some storm damage last week. Minor damage." "Handled. I'm glad to hear it." He looked past her at the fence line, at the sections Ethan had rebuilt with the good cedar and the properly tensioned wire. Ethan saw his eyes move along it and register its quality. "You've made repairs. I have a hand." Voss looked toward where Ethan was working. Ethan did not look up from the post he was setting. "I heard," Voss said. He returned his attention to Clara. "Mrs. Whitlock, I don't come out here to cause you difficulty. I think you know that. I come out of genuine regard for your situation." "I appreciate that, Mr. Voss. The note on your property comes due in October," he said. It was delivered gently, as though he were reminding her of a social engagement rather than a financial crisis. "I want to make sure you have what you need to meet it." "I will meet it," Clara said. Of course you will." "I have no doubt of your intentions." He adjusted his hat brim, a small, precise gesture. "But intention and capacity are different things, Mrs. Whitlock. The summer has been hard. I understand your cattle numbers were down from last year." "My cattle numbers are my business," Clara said. "They are," Voss agreed pleasantly. "I simply want you to know that my offer for the property remains as it was. A fair price, better than fair, honestly. You would have money enough to settle the bank's note, purchase a proper house in town, and live comfortably for several years." He paused. "For a woman in your circumstances, that kind of security—" "I will stop you there," Clara said. Her voice had not changed in volume or in temperature. But something in it had settled into a particular register, the register of a person who is very clear about what they are saying and will not be argued away from it. "I know what my circumstances are," she said. "I know what this land is worth and what it has cost. I know what the note says and when it comes due. I know precisely what my cattle numbers are, because I have written every one of them in my ledger." She held his gaze. "What I do not need from you, Mr. Voss, is a calculation of what my security should look like. I am fully capable of making that calculation myself. Voss looked at her for a moment. Something passed through his expression, not anger, exactly. More like recalibration, like a man moving a piece on a board. "You're a stubborn woman, Mrs. Whitlock," he said finally. There was almost admiration in it, almost. "I am a determined one," Clara said. "There is a difference." He tipped his hat. He rode away with his men behind him. Clara stood at the gate and watched him go, without moving, until the sound of his horses had faded from the road. Then she turned back toward the fence line and found Ethan looking at her from 20 feet away, a post driver in his hands. "How long has he been doing that?" Ethan asked. "Since March of '82, Clara said. He sent a letter first, then came in person. This is the third visit. He'll come again, I know." She looked toward the road where Voss had disappeared. "Let him come. Each time he comes, the fence is in better shape than the time before." She looked at the rebuilt north corner. "Eventually he will understand that he is not watching a woman giving up. He is watching a woman building something he will never be able to purchase." Ethan set the post driver down. He had been in a great many places. He had met a great many people in the temporary bounded way of a man who passes through rather than stays. And he thought, standing in the summer heat with the smell of cedar and cut grass around him, that he had never met a person who made the act of refusing to surrender look quite so much like a quiet, determined kind of power. He picked up the driver and went back to work, but something had shifted. He was not certain yet what to call it. He was not a man who moved quickly toward naming things that lived in his chest. But he was aware of it the way you are aware of a change in the weather before you can see it, a difference in the air, a specific quality of attention that had not been there the week before. He drove the next post with particular care. He made sure it was straight. He made sure it would hold. By the end of the fourth week, Ethan had been on the Whitlock ranch longer than he had stayed anywhere in 3 years. He told himself the fence demanded it. That was still most of the truth. But there was also the evening conversations, grown longer now, ranging from practical matters. The western pasture needed reseeding. The creek gate required new hardware before fall, to the kind of talk that happens between people who have stopped performing for each other and started simply being present. Clara told him about Thomas. Not in grief, or not only in grief, she told him the way she told most things, with the clear-eyed specificity of a woman who valued accuracy over comfort. Thomas had been a good man, patient and capable, and she had loved him with the settled, realistic love of two people who understood what they had chosen in each other. He had been funny, privately, in a dry way that she had never heard him use in public. He had made terrible coffee and excellent stew, and he had been afraid of snakes in a way that was disproportionate to the actual danger, which she had found endearing without ever letting him know she found it so. She described him without making him a saint. Ethan appreciated that. Saints are not useful company for the living. You miss him, Ethan said one evening. Every day, Clara said, but not in the way I used to. She thought about how to say the next thing. In the beginning, it was missing felt like drowning. Like there was too much space where he had been, and the space was filling with the wrong things. She was quiet for a moment. Now it is more like is part of the land. I feel him in the work. When I fix something the way he taught me to, I feel that he is still here, in some way. She looked toward the darkening pasture. That sounds foolish. It doesn't, Ethan said. He meant it. He had his own version of something following him. Not a person lost, but a choice made, a structure built with a flaw he had not caught. A man's hand lost because of it, a guilt that had attached itself to his competence and refused to be reasoned away. He had not told Clara about it. He was not sure why he had come as close to thinking it clearly tonight as he just had. But sitting next to this woman, who carried her own hard history with such stubborn, specific honesty, he found himself less able to keep his own behind the usual distance. I made a mistake, he said. Clara turned and looked at him. He looked at the fence. Years ago, building work. A loading structure. I miscalculated a load point. He did not embellish. He had learned that embellishment was a form of hiding. A man lost his hand when it failed. Clara was silent. He was standing in the wrong place, Ethan said. That's not an excuse. I built the structure. The flaw was mine. He paid for it. What happened? I paid his medical expenses. Everything I had at the time. He paused. He didn't want my apologies. Said they didn't replace what he'd lost. He was right. A long, quiet moment. I left. Couldn't he stopped, started again. I told myself I was a man who fixed things, not built them. Fixing things has a limit. You can see the end of what you're responsible for. Clara said nothing for a moment. The silence was not uncomfortable. She was thinking, not withdrawing. And have you forgiven yourself for it? She asked. No. Do you think you should? Ethan looked at her. I think, Clara said carefully, that there is a difference between forgiveness and amnesty. She met his eyes. Forgiveness does not mean the thing didn't happen. It does not mean the cost wasn't real. It means you have decided that the rest of your life will not be entirely determined by one moment that you cannot undo. She paused. You said he lost his hand. Did you take it from him deliberately? No. Did you build the structure carelessly, negligently? No, Ethan said. He had asked himself this enough times that the answer came without hesitation. I made an error in calculation. I had done it correctly 100 times. I missed it once, and since then, I haven't missed it, he said. I checked twice now, 3 times, Clara nodded. Then the mistake made you more careful, she said. Which means the man who lost his hand was not the last person your caution protected. Just the last person who bore the cost of your learning it. She looked at him steadily. That is a hard truth. Ethan was very still. No one had said that to him before, not even close. You didn't come here to fix fences, Clara said. Not only. What did I come here to fix? She smiled then, not their almost smiled he had seen once or twice before, but a real one, quiet and warm and not unkind. I think you already know the answer to that, she said. I think you've known it for a while. She stood, collected the supper dishes, and went inside. Ethan sat in the evening dark for a long time. The fence line stretched away in both directions, straight and solid, post by post by post, rebuilt from the place it had broken. He thought about what it meant to build something you intended to last. He thought about the difference between a man who repairs and a man who stays. He sat there until the stars came fully out over the Kansas plain and the night insects filled the silence, and the bunkhouse window glowed with the small, steady lamp he had left burning. Then he went inside, and for the first time in longer than he could honestly remember, he did not lie on the cot and try to think about nothing. He lay there and let himself think about what it might mean to stay somewhere long enough to become part of it. It was the most frightening thought he had entertained in years. He held on to it anyway. The morning after their conversation about forgiveness, Ethan was at the fence line before Clara. That had never happened before. He had the post driver in his hands and 3 new posts already set by the time she came through the barn gate with the water pail and her notebook, and she stopped when she saw him, just for a second, with an expression that said she had noticed, without deciding yet what to make of it. She did not remark on it. She set the water pail down within his reach and went to her section of the wire. That was all. But it was enough. Something had changed between them in the span of one honest evening, and both of them were old enough and careful enough to know that the right way to treat a new and fragile thing was not to examine it too directly. You worked alongside it. You let it grow at its own pace. You did not put your hands on it until it was ready to bear the weight. So they worked. The south fence section was the longest remaining repair, running nearly a quarter mile along the road-facing side of the property where the posts had been sunk shallow and the wire had rusted through in 3 separate places. It was the section most visible to anyone traveling the county road, which meant it was the section that told the story of the ranch to anyone passing by. A sagging broken fence told one story, a rebuilt fence told another. Ethan understood that Clara understood this. She had prioritized the sections by practicality north corner first, because the cattle pressured it, east line second, because the creek flooding threatened the posts, but the south fence, the visible one, had been on her list from the beginning. He could tell by the way she walked it every few days, not inspecting it the way she inspected the working sections, but looking at it, the way you look at something you are waiting to fix. "You want this one done before the harvest buyers come through," Heath said, not as a question. Clara looked at him. "Yes," she said. "Voss has 2 men on that road every market week. He makes sure they are seen." She looked at the sagging wire. "A ranch with a collapsing road fence tells everyone who matters that the owner is losing ground. And a ranch with a solid road fence tells a different story entirely." He drove the first post of the south section that morning, with the particular focus of a man who has decided what a piece of work means. They fell into the rhythm of it, and for a while there was nothing but the sound of the tools and the heat, and the dry Kansas wind, moving through the grass. Ethan had learned that Clara's silences were not empty, they were the silences of a woman thinking at full capacity, processing, planning, keeping the 3 or 4 urgent problems of the ranch arranged in their proper order of importance inside her head at all times. He had started doing the same thing, not just the fence. The whole picture, the eastern pasture that needed reseeding before September, or she would lose the carrying capacity for winter. The barn's east door, which held now but would not hold another serious storm without new hardware on the upper hinge. The creek gate that kept the cattle from the lower pasture in wet season, currently held shut by a rope and a prayer. He had started cataloging these things the way he cataloged fence damage automatically, without choosing to. That fact made him uneasy in a way he had not examined closely yet. It was around mid-morning when Nora Hensley arrived. Ethan heard the buggy before he saw it, the particular quick clip of a horse being driven by someone in a hurry. Clara heard it too, and straightened from the wire she was mending and looked toward the road. A small woman in her 40s, dressed in a dark blue dress with the dust of a long drive on her hem, brought the buggy to a stop at the road gate and leaned out. "Clara," she called. "Clara, I need to speak with you." Clara set down her pliers. "That's Nora Hensley," she said to Ethan quietly. "Her husband runs the feed merchant. She means well." She walked to the gate. Ethan stayed where he was and worked, close enough to hear. "What is it, Nora?" Clara said. Nora Hensley leaned from the buggy seat and lowered her voice in the way of someone who believes they are being tactful while actually delivering a blow. "I heard something yesterday," she said, "at the bank. Warren Alt was speaking with someone I couldn't see who, and I heard your name, and the note, and October." Clara's face did not change. "What did you hear specifically?" "They've moved the payment date," Nora said, "to the 15th of September. Not October, September." She pressed her lips together. Someone applied pressure. I don't know who. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. "Thank you, Nora," Clara said. "Clara, that is 6 weeks less than mine." "I know what it is," Clara said. "Thank you for coming to tell me." Nora looked at her with the expression of a woman who wants to offer more comfort than she has the courage to give and is frustrated with herself for the gap between the two. "Is there anything I can do?" she asked. "Tell Harold I'll be in for feed on Friday," Clara said. "And tell him I would like the standard credit terms extended through the end of August." "I can't promise he'll—" "I know you can't promise," Clara said. "Tell him anyway." Nora Hensley drove away. Clara stood at the gate for 3 seconds that Ethan counted without meaning to, her hand on the post, her back to him. He saw her shoulders go up once, then down, slow, deliberate. The breathing of someone who is making a private decision not to be knocked flat by something that just hit hard. Then she turned around and walked back to the fence line and picked up her pliers. "September 15th, Ethan said. "Yes, that's Voss." "Without question," Clara said. She bent back to the wire. "He has a cousin on the bank's lending board. This is not the first time he has used that connection." She twisted the wire end with a precise, controlled movement. "He is trying to create a crisis I can't outwork." "Can you meet September 15th? "I need to sell the cattle before the autumn slump," she said. "I need the Hargrove buyer to come in August instead of October. I need the south fence to be standing when he rides by, because Hargrove will not do business with a ranch that looks like it is one storm away from failure." She looked at the road fence section stretched in front of them. And I need this fence done in 2 weeks. Ethan set the post driver against his shoulder. Then let's not stand here talking about it, he said. They worked through noon without stopping for lunch. Clara brought bread and water out to the fence line, and they ate standing, which was not a comfort but was efficient, and efficiency was what the next 2 weeks demanded. Ethan had reset 4 posts by afternoon, and Clara had restrung 2 wire sections, and the section of the south fence nearest the road was already transformed straight, solid, the posts set at proper depth, the wire tensioned correctly. A fence that told the story of a ranch under capable management. But Ethan's mind was running alongside the physical work. He had a habit, when a problem was genuinely complex, of going quiet in a way that looked like nothing but was actually his most active thinking. He had learned years ago that talking about a problem before he had worked through it himself produced worse solutions than sitting with it until it clarified. Clara seemed to understand this intuitively. She did not try to draw him out of the quiet, and he appreciated that with a specific gratitude he had not needed to extend to many people. What he was thinking about was the Hargrove buyer. He had heard the name from Clara twice before, a cattle buyer out of Wichita with good connections to the eastern markets, a man who worked a regular circuit through this part of Kansas in the autumn. He was Clara's best prospect for a strong sale price on her remaining herd. But October was his usual larkspur run. Pulling him forward to August would require either a personal contact Ethan did not know if Clara had, or something that made the stop worth his while. That evening he asked her, "You have any connection to the Hargrove operation directly? Anyone who knows the buyer personally?" Clara looked up from the ledger. "I met his circuit manager twice when Thomas was alive." "A man named Delbert Fitch." She paused. "I have not spoken to Fitch since Thomas died." "He did not extend condolences, but you know the name." "I know the name." Ethan leaned forward. "Write to Fitch. Don't ask him to move the schedule. Offer him something that makes moving worth his while." Clara's eyes went to the ledger, and he could see her thinking the quick, sharp arithmetic of a woman who knew her numbers without looking at them. "If I offered a guaranteed purchase minimum," she said slowly. "A floor price for whatever they choose to buy, so Fitch doesn't risk an August trip and come back empty." "You carry the risk instead of him," Ethan said. "Yes." She worked the pencil against the paper, running numbers. "I can do it. If the herd is healthy and the weight is where it should be, the margin holds." She looked up. "This is not a comfortable position." "No," Ethan agreed. "But a September note with no cattle sale is less comfortable." Clara looked at him for a moment. "You think quickly," she said. "I think constantly," he said. "I just don't always say it out loud." She turned back to the ledger and worked the numbers twice more, checking them with the care of a person who knows that an error in this room is the same as an error in the field. Then she took a fresh sheet of paper and began the letter to Delbert Fitch. Ethan watched her write. Her handwriting was deliberate and clear. No flourishes, no wasted strokes. The handwriting of someone who had learned to write for function rather than for impression, and had ended up with something precise and unexpectedly elegant because of it. He looked away. Ethan, he looked back. Clara had stopped writing. She was looking at the paper. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. The question was not what he expected, and he did not have a prepared answer, which meant what came out was the honest one. "Because it needs doing," he said. "You came for fence work," she said. "You're doing fence work. This is." She gestured at the letter, at the ledger, at the problem they had spent the evening solving. "This is something else I noticed," he said. She looked at him directly. "I'm not paying you for this," she said. It was not a refusal or an accusation. It was a fact stated plainly, the way she stated all facts, because she believed people deserved to know exactly where they stood. "I know," Ethan said. "Then why?" He thought about how much truth to tell and decided, as he had been deciding with increasing frequency since the conversation about forgiveness, that the amount was more rather than less. "Because I have been on a great many ranches," he said, "and I have seen a great many situations where the person working hardest was the person getting the least help. And I have ridden away from most of them without doing anything about it." He paused. "I'm tired of riding away." Clara held his gaze for a long moment. Then she looked back at the paper and finished the letter. But her pen moved differently after that, still precise, still deliberate, but with something that might have been, if you were watching carefully, the particular ease of a person who has been carrying something alone for a very long time and has just quietly been offered a hand. She did not say thank you. She did not need to. The letter reached Delbert Fitch in Wichita on a Wednesday. His reply came back the following Thursday, which was faster than Clara expected, and she brought the envelope out to the fence line unopened, which told Ethan more than she probably knew about what the opening of it meant to her. She read it standing. Her face did not change while she read. He had learned to watch the small things, the line of her jaw, the set of her shoulders, rather than waiting for expressions she did not tend to make. The jaw was still, the shoulders stayed level. She finished, folded the letter, and looked at the south fence. "He'll come August the 3rd, she said. "He wants the guaranteed floor price in writing before the end of July. He's bringing 2 buyers, not 1, and he says if the herd is what I say it is, he'll move all of it in a single transaction." She paused. "He also says he heard we had a good fence man working the property." Ethan stopped driving the post he was setting. "Heard it from who?" "He doesn't say." Clara folded the letter with precise movements. "But Fitch doesn't move his schedule for nothing, and he doesn't respond in 10 days for nothing either. Someone told him this ranch is worth his time." Ethan picked up the driver. "The fence will be done before the 3rd, he said." "I know it will," Clara said. She tucked the letter into her apron pocket. "That's not what concerns me. What does?" She looked at the road. "When Voss finds out Fitch is coming in August, he will know the deadline pressure failed." She touched the letter in her pocket. "He will do something else." She was right. The something else arrived 4 days later in the form of a man named Cray, who worked for the lumber merchant in town, and came out to the ranch with a message that the cedar credit Clara had been using for the fence repairs had been with regrets. "Terribly sorry. Nothing to be done about it. Suspended pending a review of her account standing. No cedar, not on credit." Ethan was with Clara when Cray delivered this news, standing at the barn with a piece of new hardware in his hand, and he watched Clara listen to the full message without interrupting, and then thank Cray for his trouble in the measured, courteous tone of a woman who is not going to give anyone the satisfaction of watching her react. Cray rode away. "How much cedar do we still need?" Clara asked. Ethan ran the numbers in his head. 12 posts for the south section. 8 for the western corner. Could reduce it to 15 total if I space the middle section slightly wider. Still holds. Just needs better wire tension to compensate. "Can you purchase 15 posts with cash?" she asked. "I have enough for 10. I have enough for 7, Clara said. "Between us 17, Ethan said. "We buy 15, we have $2 left." "Do it," Clara said. "Today." He went to town. He walked into the lumber merchant's, not Voss's preferred merchant, but the smaller one on the south side of town. A man named Gravis, who had the look of someone who minded his own business with considerable discipline, and bought 15 cedar fence posts with combined cash money, loaded them into the wagon, and drove them back without incident. Gravis had not asked any questions. Ethan appreciated that. He brought the posts back, and Clara was already at the south section with the post holes marked and the tools laid out, and they worked until the light was fully gone, because the light was what they had, and the deadline was what they had. And in the space between those two facts, there was only work. By the time they stopped, 9 posts of the south section were standing. 6 more, Ethan said. "Tomorrow," Clara said. Her voice was level, but Ethan could see the tiredness on her, not weakness. Never that, but the honest physical cost of a day that had asked more than its fair share and received it without apology. Her hands were bruised along the knuckle lines where she had driven posts in the final hour of fading light, when the mallet had glanced more than once. He did not remark on the bruises. She would not want him to. But when she passed him on the way to the house, he said quietly, "You're going to win this, you know." Clara stopped. She turned and looked at him, and for the first time since he had come to this ranch, he saw something pass through her face that was not composure or determination, or the controlled, productive anger she channeled into work. Something that was underneath all of those things, the thing they were all protecting. It was exhaustion. Real and total, the kind that lives not in the body, but in the place where a person keeps their faith in themselves. It passed in a second. She squared her shoulders and it was gone. "I know," she said. "I just need to get there first." She went inside. Ethan stood in the dark for a long moment. He thought about a woman who had carried this much, alone, for 2 years, without a single person standing beside her who was not there for their own reasons. He thought about what it cost to keep believing in yourself when everyone around you was betting on your failure. He thought about the bruises on her knuckles. Then he went to the bunkhouse and lay on the cot and did not sleep for a long time. The 6th post of the South section went in on a Tuesday morning. The 7th went in before noon. By the time Hargrove's man Fitch was due in 3 weeks, every remaining post of the south fence was standing, the wire was strung and tensioned correctly, and the road-facing side of the Whitlock Ranch presented. To anyone traveling the county road at any speed, the clear and unambiguous story of a property under competent, determined management. Ethan walked the finished section with Clara on a Wednesday evening. She ran her hand along the top wire, the way she had run her hand along the north corner post.
"First time,"
with the testing pressure of a woman who trusted actions over words. The wire held, the post did not move, the tension was even all the way to the corner. She took her hand off the wire. "Well," she said. "Well," Ethan said. She almost smiled. He was beginning to learn the almost smiles. There were gradations. This one, with the slight softening around the eyes and the controlled lift at the corner of her mouth, was the one that meant she was genuinely, privately pleased but had not yet decided to let it be visible. He found he liked that smile best of all. "The western corner still needs the last 8 posts," she said. "I'll start it tomorrow. And the creek new hardware," he said. "I can get it when I go to Gravis for the door bolt you need." She turned and looked at him. "You've been making a list," she said. "I've been making a list," he confirmed. She was quiet for a moment. "In your head, in my head. What else is on it?" He told her. The eastern pasture seed, she needed to order it before the end of July or the good variety would be sold out. The south barn roof batten at the second joint it was holding, but one serious storm would take it. The water pump seal it was beginning to pull, not yet failing but within a month of failing, and a failed pump during cattle work was a crisis that cost 2 days. She listened without writing anything down. He understood, watching her, that she had known all of these things. They were already in the notebook, in the ledger, arranged in the order of their urgency inside the organized, tireless mechanism of her mind. She was not learning new information. She was hearing it said out loud by someone else. There was something in that, he knew. Something about not being alone with the weight of it. "The seed I can order Friday," she said. "The roof batten I'll do Saturday morning if the weather holds." "The pump seal." She paused. "I haven't been able to get to the pump seal because every time I have an hour, something more urgent has claimed it." "I'll do the pump seal," Ethan said. "That's not fence work." "No," he said, "but the fence is mostly done." She looked at the finished south section and then at him and then at the section again. "You were hired for fence work," she said. It was not an argument. It was the statement of a woman who was trying to understand something that was happening slightly outside the boundaries of what she had planned for. "I was," he said. "The fence is mostly done, yes." "Which means your job here is mostly finished." The word landed with a weight that neither of them named directly. "Finished." Ethan looked at the fence. "It'll need maintenance through August," he said. "Storm season." Clara turned and looked at him with the steady, clear-eyed gaze of a woman who can tell when a practical reason is carrying more than practical weight, and who has the particular honesty to not let it go unacknowledged and the particular grace to not force it into words. "Storm season," she said. "Yes, ma'am." She held his gaze for one moment longer than was strictly necessary. "Then I suppose we'd better make sure the maintenance materials are on hand," she said. She walked back toward the house. Ethan stood at the finished fence and felt something that took him a moment to identify, because it had been absent from his experience for long enough that he had stopped expecting it. It was the feeling of being exactly where he was supposed to be. He had not felt that in 10 years. He was not sure what to do with it yet. But he was, for the first time in longer than he could honestly account for, in no hurry to go anywhere at all. 3 days before Fitch's arrival, Preston Voss made his second visit to the ranch. He came alone this time, which was different, and he came in the middle of the working day, which was calculated. A man who comes during work hours knows he is interrupting something, and does it anyway because he wants you to feel the interruption. Clara was in the barn, checking the cattle weights, when Ethan heard the horse and came around the south fence corner to see the Voss dismounting at the road gate. Voss looked at the south fence. He stood there and he looked at it for a long moment, the way a man looks at something that has failed to cooperate with his expectations. And his face went through a careful process of adjustment before he got it back to the smooth, reasonable expression he preferred to present. He saw Ethan. "You're the fence man," he said. "Yes, sir," Ethan said. He did not move toward him. He did not move away. He simply stood where he was with a fence post driver in his hand, and the particular stillness of a man who is not impressed by other men's money. "Good work," Voss said, nodding at the south fence. He said it the way someone says good work when the work has complicated their plans, with the thinness of a compliment given under duress. "Mrs. Whitlock gives good direction," Ethan said. Something shifted in Voss's expression. "Not much, just a fraction," the shift of a man recalculating. "Is she available?" he asked. "I'll let her know you're here," Ethan said. He went to the barn. Clara was standing at the cattle pen with her notebook open, and she looked up when he came in. "Voss," Ethan said. "Alone." Clara closed the notebook. She walked out of the barn without hurrying, and Ethan walked beside her, which was not something he planned, but was something his body did without consulting him, the instinctive positioning of a person who has decided, perhaps more fully than he had acknowledged, where his line of loyalty falls. Voss was standing at the gate when they came around the barn corner, and he saw them come together, Ethan half a step behind, and to Clara's left. Close enough to make a statement without making a speech, and the recalibration that had started in his face when he saw the fence moved another small but visible degree. "Mrs. Whitlock," he said, the pleasant smile, the reasonable voice. "You're looking well, Mr. Voss," Clara said. "You've seen my fence, I imagine." "I have." He looked at it again briefly. "It's an impressive repair." "I'll say that plainly, thank you." "I'll pass that to the man who built it." She did not look at Ethan. "What is it you need today, Mr. Voss?" Voss put his hands in his coat pockets and looked at Clara with the expression of a man who is shifting approaches in real time, moving from the strategy that has failed to the one he has kept in reserve. "I heard Fitch is coming in August," he said. Clara did not react to this. "Not even slightly." Ethan admired it. "Hargrove's buyer travels a full circuit," Clara said. "I imagine you hear about most of his stops." "I do," Voss said. "I buy through Fitch myself on occasion." A pause. "He's bringing 2 buyers this time. That's unusual for a mid-summer stop." "I wouldn't know," Clara said. "I simply wrote to him about my herd." Voss studied her. He was not a stupid man, Ethan could see that. He was a man who had won a great number of negotiations by being more patient than his opponents and more willing to apply indirect pressure. And he was standing in front of a woman who had absorbed 6 months of that pressure and was still standing at her own fence gate, looking him in the eye without blinking. He was revising his assessment of her in real time. Ethan could see it happening. "The September date stands," Voss said. It was not a threat. It was information, delivered with the courtesy of a man who wanted you to understand he still held something. "I know when my note is due," Clara said. "Of course you do." Voss looked at the fence one more time. Then at Ethan, then back at Clara. "You've built yourself some useful alliances, Mrs. Whitlock." "I've done what needed doing," Clara said. Voss tipped his hat. He mounted his horse. He rode away without looking back, which told Ethan more than looking back would have. A man who doesn't look back is a man who doesn't want you to see what's on his face. Clara waited until the sound of the horse was fully off the road. Then she exhaled. It was the first time Ethan had ever heard her exhale like that, not dramatically, not as release, but as the quiet decompression of a person who has held a position under fire and is now, privately, noting the cost of it. "He knows about Fitch," she said. "Knew before he came," Ethan said. "Yes." She turned back toward the barn. "He's done with the financial pressure." That strategy failed. She walked steadily. "He'll try something else." Concerned, she stopped, turned. "I am deeply concerned," she said. "I just don't find it useful to perform that concern for men who are hoping to see it." She looked at him directly. "You understand the difference." He did. "What do you think he'll do?" Ethan asked. Clara looked toward the road where Voss had disappeared. "I think," she said slowly, "that a man like Preston Voss, who has exhausted the pressure he can apply to a woman's finances, will next try to apply pressure to her reputation." She turned and walked into the barn. "And in a county like this one, that is a sharper weapon than anything he has tried so far." Ethan stood in the barn entrance and watched her go back to her cattle pen and her notebook and her numbers, back to the relentless, ordered discipline of a woman who had decided that the only answer to a world trying to knock her down was to stay methodically, devastatingly upright. He thought about what she had just said. He thought about a town that had already told itself one story about Clara Whitlock. He thought about how much easier it was to believe a story you already wanted to be true. And he thought about the fact that a cattle buyer from Wichita was coming in 3 days, and that the first thing that buyer would see when he turned onto the county road toward this ranch was a fence that told a story of its own, straight and solid and maintained, with evident care, post by post by post, all the way to the gate. Let Voss try what he tried, the fence stood. And Ethan Calloway, who had arrived 6 weeks ago believing himself to be a man who fixed things temporarily and moved on before they could require more of him, was standing in the door of Clara Whitlock's barn and not thinking about moving at all. He was thinking about the pump seal. He was thinking about the East pasture seed. He was thinking about storm season. He was thinking about everything that still needed doing on a piece of land that had started, somewhere in the last 6 weeks, to feel like his to care about. He picked up his tools. He went to work. Delbert Fitch arrived on August 3rd at 9:30 in the morning, which was earlier than Clara expected, and exactly on time by Fitch's own reckoning. Because Fitch was a man who considered punctuality a form of professional respect and extended it to sellers the same way he extended it to buyers. He came with 2 men behind him, as promised, a younger buyer named Aldous, who worked the eastern markets, and a heavy-set appraiser named Cole, who said very little but missed nothing. They turned onto the county road in a good wagon pulled by matched horses, and the first thing all 3 of them saw was the south fence. Ethan was at the western corner, working when he heard the wagon. He straightened and watched. Fitch slowed the wagon without being asked to. He looked at the fence the way a man in his business looks at everything connected to a ranch as evidence. A fence told you about the owner before you ever shook their hand. It told you about their standards, their resources, their relationship to the land they were asking you to invest in. The south fence of the Whitlock Ranch told a clear story. Fitch clicked his horse forward to the gate. Clara was already there. She had dressed for this meeting with the same practical deliberateness she brought to everything, not with an attempt to be something she was not, but with the particular dignity of a woman who understands that how you present yourself is its own form of communication. Her dress was clean, her hair was pinned neatly under her hat. She wore no apron. She held her notebook in her left hand and extended her right. "Mr. Fitch," she said, "thank you for making the trip." Fitch shook her hand. He had a good evaluating handshake and he used it. "Mrs. Whitlock," he said, "your letter was persuasive." He looked past her toward the barn and the pasture beyond. "I'll say the property looks better than I was led to expect." Clara's eyes went briefly to Ethan, then back to Fitch. "Better than who led you to expect?" she asked, quietly. Directly. Fitch had the slightly uncomfortable expression of a man who has said more than he meant to. "Word travels on a circuit," he said carefully. "I'll leave it at that." "You'll leave it at that," Clara agreed. "And you'll find my herd is exactly what I described in the letter." "Shall we begin?" they began. Ethan stayed at the western corner and worked. but he tracked the movement of the three men and Clara across the pasture, the deliberate, methodical circuit of professional cattle assessment. With Cole making notes and Aldous asking questions that Clara answered without hesitation, every number she gave coming without reference to the notebook, because the numbers lived in her, had always lived in her. The whole arithmetic of the ranch arranged inside her with the same precision she applied to the fence line. He could hear the conversation when the wind was right. "Feeding program?" Aldous asked. "Grass primary through July, grain supplemented from the 1st of August, Clara said. "I have the feed records if you need them." "Weight gain rate?" She gave him the number. Aldous wrote it down. Cole walked around the nearest cattle and pressed his hands along a steer's back with the professional certainty of a man who has assessed 10,000 animals and trusts his hands more than any number. He straightened up, looked at Clara. "These are good cattle," he said. It was the most words Ethan had heard him say, and he delivered them the way you deliver a verdict, plainly, without embellishment. Clara did not smile. "They are." The assessment took 2 hours. At the end of it, Fitch stood at the gate with his 2 men and looked at Clara and did the particular thing that experienced buyers do, which is wait long enough to see if the seller is nervous. Some sellers filled that silence with concession, dropped their price or adjusted their terms, because the silence felt like refusal. Clara looked at Fitch and waited him out with the same patience she used on everything. Fitch bought the entire herd, not at the floor price she had guaranteed. At 4% above it. Aldous drew up the purchase agreement at the tailgate of the wagon, and when Clara signed it, she used the pen with the same precise, controlled strokes of a woman who is writing something she has earned, and she did not look at Ethan when she did it. But her back was very straight and her shoulders were level, and he knew what that particular posture meant by now. It meant she was not going to let herself feel it until she was alone. Fitch shook her hand again at the gate. "Good doing business with you, Mrs. Whitlock," he said. "I'll be back in October for the next circuit." "If you're expanding the herd, I intend to," Clara said. Fitch nodded, looked at the fence one more time. "Whoever built that road section," he said, "knows what they're doing." "He does," Clara said. Fitch and his men drove away. Clara stood at the gate until the wagon was off the road. Then she turned, and she walked to where Ethan was still standing at the western corner with a fence post in his hands and a look on his face that he was not entirely in control of, and she stopped in front of him. 4% above floor, she said. "I heard. The September note is covered," she said. "By a margin. Good. There will be money left for the East pasture seed," she said. "And the pump seal, and the barn hinge." She stopped. Her jaw moved slightly, and possibly a proper winter coat, because mine is. She stopped again. Ethan waited. "Mine is 4 years old," she said very quietly. "And I have not let myself buy a new one." He understood what that meant. In 2 years of holding this ranch together, of writing every expenditure in the ledger and choosing the ranch over herself in every small decision that came to the same choice, she had not spent a dollar on herself that she did not have to. "Buy the coat," he said. "Buy the coat, Clara." Her name was in his voice before he knew he had put it there, and they both heard it, and neither of them looked away from it. "All right," she said. Very quietly, she went inside. Ethan drove the next post so hard it went 6 inches deeper than necessary, and he stood looking at it for a second, and then felt something that might have been, if he was being fully honest with himself, the closest thing to happiness he had experienced in a very long time. The happiness lasted 11 days. On August 14th, a man named Carver Bowles, who ran the town's primary social organization, a combination of civic body and gossip engine that operated under the formal name of the Larks County Improvement Society, called a public meeting. Ethan heard about it from Gravis, the lumber merchant, who mentioned it the same way he mentioned everything sideways, without eye contact, in the specific tone of a man who feels responsible to deliver information, but not accountable for what you do with it. Meeting at the hall Wednesday evening, Gravis said, rapping the door bolt Ethan had come in for. "Bowles is calling it. Agendas about ranch management standards in the county." He set the package on the counter. Whitlock property is on the agenda by name. Ethan was very still. By name, he said. By name, Gravis confirmed. He looked at the counter. There are people in this county, Mr. Calloway, who have decided that a certain woman's success is inconvenient to certain interests. He pushed the package forward. I'll say nothing more about it. Ethan paid for the bolt. He rode back to the ranch and found Clara at the creek gate, replacing the hardware he had purchased the previous week. She had done it herself, which did not surprise him. She had the tools and the knowledge and the particular self-sufficient competence of a woman who had stopped waiting for help to materialize and had learned to be the help. He told her about the meeting. She did not stop working while he talked. She did not respond for a moment after he finished. Then she set the wrench down with a careful, controlled movement that was not quite calm and not quite anger, but lived in the specific temperature between them. Bowles, she said, his wife is on the Women's Aid Committee. His oldest boy has credit through Voss's operation. She picked the wrench back up. He is not an independent voice. What does the meeting mean practically? It means Voss has moved to the strategy I told you he would move to, Clara said. She tightened the new bolt with 2 turns, reputation. If he cannot break my finances and he cannot prevent my cattle sale, he will try to persuade this county that I am a poor manager. A liability. Someone who should not be trusted with land this size. She tested the gate. It swung clean, and in a county where a woman's credibility is 2 degrees more fragile than a man's, that is not a strategy without teeth. You going to the meeting? Ethan asked. Clara looked at the gate. Then at him. If I go, she said, I give the meeting legitimacy. I stand in front of people who have already decided what they think of me, and I defend myself, which looks like guilt. And I do it while being a large woman in a room full of people who have made up their minds about what large women are capable of. She paused. If I don't go, I look like I have something to hide. Or like you don't think it's worth your time, Ethan said. Clara looked at him. Say that again, she said. If you don't go, Ethan said slowly, it could read as confidence. A woman who shows up to defend herself is worried. A woman who doesn't show up because she is too busy running a successful ranch to attend a meeting about her competence. Makes a different statement entirely, Clara said. They looked at each other. I'll be branding the remaining cattle on Wednesday, Clara said. I'll need help. I'll be here, said. She nodded. Picked up her tools. Ethan. He looked at her. You think like someone who has been in harder situations than fence work, she said. He almost smiled, you noticed. I notice everything, Clara said. She walked back toward the barn. It's the only reason I'm still here. Wednesday evening came and went. Ethan and Clara branded the last of the cattle by lantern light, and the work was hard and hot and required both of them fully, and the meeting at the hall happened without them, while the Whitlock Ranch was producing the specific, documented evidence of competent management that no meeting could contradict. Nora Hensley came by Thursday morning. She arrived in a hurry, which was different from her usual manner, and Clara met her at the gate with the expression of a woman who has been waiting for information and is ready to receive it clearly. The meeting began. What was said, Clara said. Specifically, Nora twisted her gloves in her hands. Bowles read a list of what he called operational concerns about your property. He said there were questions about whether the size of the operation exceeded your management capacity. He said there were safety concerns about the barn structure. She paused. He said there were questions about the character of people you had brought onto the property. The last sentence landed. Ethan heard it from where he was standing at the barn and felt it go through him like cold water. Clara did not look at him. My character, Ethan said, to no one in particular. They didn't use your name, Nora said quickly. They said they referred to a hired hand of unknown background and unverified. They didn't need to use my name, Ethan said. Clara turned and looked at him then. Her expression was controlled and direct, and carrying something underneath that he recognized because he had felt it himself in the worst period of his life, the cold, specific anger of a person who is being used as a weapon against someone they care about. Clara said, "Who was in the room?" Nora listed the names. 12 people. 8 of them had some connection, direct or indirect, to Voss's operation. And on our side? Clara asked. Your side? Was there anyone in that room who spoke against the concerns being raised? Nora's expression shifted. Harold did, she said, surprising herself slightly. He said he had extended you credit for 4 years and you had never missed a payment, and he would stand behind that record against any rumor. Clara was quiet. Harold said that, she repeated. He did. Nora had the look of a woman who was genuinely moved by what she was reporting. He said the only operational concern he had ever heard that made any sense was the one about the fence, and he'd heard the fence was now the best maintained in this part of the county. She looked at the south fence line. He said if there were questions about the character of Mrs. Whitlock's hired hand, perhaps they should look at what he'd built instead of what they could imagine about him. The silence went 3 full seconds. Ethan turned back to the barn. He pressed his hand flat against the barn wall and stood there a moment, and breathed. Harold Hensley had stood up in a public meeting in front of Voss's people and said that. He did not know Harold Hensley. He had bought supplies from his store twice. He had been courteous, and the man had been courteous back. That was the full extent of it, and Harold Hensley had stood up in that room. Tell Harold, Ethan said, without turning around, that his credit with me is permanent. He heard Nora make a small startled sound. I'll tell him, she said softly. Clara thanked Nora and waited until she was gone, and then turned to look at the barn, where Ethan still had his hand pressed against the wall. You all right? She asked. Yes, he said. He turned around. I'm all right. The meeting didn't accomplish what it was meant to accomplish, Clara said. Without consensus, Bowles can't bring a formal complaint. Without a formal complaint, Voss has no legal lever. She folded her arms. He's running out of moves. That's when men like Voss get dangerous, Ethan said. Clara looked at him for a long moment. Yes, she said. It is. The storm came on August 19th. It came the way the worst Kansas storms come, with a morning that looked ordinary. A sky that turned in the afternoon without warning from blue to the specific greenish gray that people who had lived in that state their whole lives recognized and feared. And then a wind that arrived not gradually but all at once, like a door being thrown open. Ethan was at the western fence corner when he felt the wind change. He looked up. The sky to the southwest had that color. He was moving before he finished the thought. Clara, he shouted, crossing the yard at a run. Clara, storm coming, southwest. She came out of the barn at a run. One look at the sky, and the next 10 minutes were organized chaos of the particular efficient kind that comes from 2 people who have worked together long enough to not need to explain what needs doing. Ethan secured the barn doors, both of them, the east one, with the new hardware that swung clean and solid. Clara moved the horses into the stalls with the low, steady murmuring voice she used with them, the voice that said, I am here and you are safe, and the horses believed her, the way animals believe people who mean what they say. The wind built. The cattle were in the west pasture and there was no time to move them. Ethan made that calculation in seconds, trading options, deciding. The west pasture fence was solid. The cattle would shelter at the low end. That was the right call. He said it to Clara as she came out of the barn. West pasture? She asked. South corner. Low ground. The fence will hold, he said. I built it to hold. She looked at him, trusted him. All right, she said. The storm hit full at 4 in the afternoon. It was not like the summer storm that had come in July that had been noise and rain and limited consequence. This was something else. The wind was serious and sustained, and the rain came in at an angle that turned it into something more like assault than weather. Ethan was in the barn loft, checking the roof battening, when he heard the sound, not the wind, and not the rain, but a different sound, a deep wooden crack with an impact at the end of it. Tree. He knew it before he looked. He came down the loft ladder in 3 movements and pushed the barn door open against the wind and found Clara already outside, looking at the eastern side of the barn where a large cottonwood had come down across the corner, its trunk hitting the roof edge and sending 2 beams crashing inward onto the barn floor. The corner of the roof had partially collapsed. Inside, two of the horses that had been near that stall were backed against the far wall, eyes wide, legs planted. And Clara was moving toward the barn. Clara Ethan started. "The horses," she said. She didn't stop, he followed. The inside of the damaged corner was a wreckage of fallen beams and roofing material, and the weight of the tree pressing down from outside. And the two horses nearest it were trapped not by the beams directly, but by fear, their natural impulse to run blocked by the debris on one side and the stall wall on the other. Clara went to the nearest horse. She put her hands on its neck, right under the jaw, and she talked to it low, constant, the same tone as always. "I am here. I am here. It is all right." And the horse's eyes, showing white at the rim, began to settle. Ethan moved to the beams. He looked at the collapse. And the world stopped. It was not the barn he was seeing. It was Missouri. It was 8 years ago. It was a loading structure he had built with good lumber and careful measurements, and one error in a load calculation that he had not caught. And he was standing in the aftermath of it with a man named Coulter holding what remained of his left hand and looking at Ethan with an expression that was not anger yet. It was the specific look of someone who has not yet understood what has happened to them. Ethan had built it wrong. Ethan had miscalculated. And Coulter had paid for it. The beams in front of him blurred for 1 second. Then he heard Clara's voice, not a shout, not a command. His name, said the way she had said it one other time, with a directness that bypassed all the static between his ears and reached the part of him that was still functional. He looked at her. She had the horse calm. She was looking at him. "I need your hands," she said, "not your fear, not what happened before. Your hands." She had never spoken to him about Missouri. He had told her once, months ago it felt like, and she had listened and said what she said and never mentioned it again. She was mentioning it now, because she knew. She knew exactly what was happening inside him, and she was not going to let him disappear into it. "Your hands, Ethan," she said. He moved. He moved to the first beam and he put his hands on it, and he felt the weight and the angle, and his mind, the part of his mind that understood structures and load points, and the geometry of force, came back online with the specific clarity of a tool being picked up by someone who knows how to use it. The first beam was resting on the second. The second was resting on the remains of the stall wall. The tree was pressing from outside at an oblique angle. If he moved the first beam wrong, the second would shift, and the remaining roof section would drop. He needed a support. "Pitchfork handles," he said. "Both of them. The long-handled rake. Bring them." Clara moved to get them. He positioned himself under the first beam and took its weight across his shoulders. It was heavy, seriously heavy, but not beyond what he could hold for 60 seconds, and he shouted to Clara, "First handle." Vertical. Under the right end, she positioned it. "Press it into the floor. Angle it toward the stall post." "Hard," she pressed. "Hold it." He shifted the beam off his shoulders onto the handle brace, controlling the movement centimeter by centimeter, feeling every weight transfer with his hands, hearing the groan of the wood, and reading it the way he read all structures as information. The handle took the weight, the beam held. The roof section above did not move. He took 4 seconds, breathed. Then he went to the second beam. "Long rake handle," he said. "Horizontal this time, between the stall posts." "I need a cross brace." Clara did it without asking why. That was the thing about Clara Whitlock. That was not a small thing. She did not demand explanations for decisions made by people she trusted. She had extended him that trust completely, and she was extending it now, in the hardest possible moment, with the wind tearing at the barn walls and the rain coming through the broken roof corner, and 2 frightened horses 12 feet from her. He braced the second beam. He checked the third. The third was resting against the tree trunk and would not move without the tree moving first, and the tree was not moving, so the third was stable. He stood back and looked at the whole structure with the complete, professional attention of a man who is done running from what he knows. "It'll hold," he said. "The main structure is intact. This corner is damaged, but the roof's not going to drop further, as long as the wind doesn't push the tree." He looked at Clara. "The horses need to come out of this corner. Can you move them?" Yes, she said. She moved them. She brought both horses out of the damaged section and into the center stalls with the same low, steady voice. And they went with her because she was the kind of person horses understood, someone whose confidence was not performed but simply present, like the ground under your feet. Ethan put his hands on the emergency brace he had built and tested it. It did not move. Outside, the storm was still at full force, but inside the barn the chaos had settled into something manageable. The difference between a crisis and a problem was something Ethan Calloway knew what to do with. He turned. Clara was standing 6 feet away, both hands still resting on the second horse's neck, her clothes soaked through, her hair come loose from its pins. A cut along her left palm, from where she had pressed the pitchfork handle, hard enough that the wood grain had opened the skin. She was looking at him. "The horses are safe," she said. "Yes," he said. "The barn is standing, yes." She looked at his hands. Then at his face, at the thing that was in his face right now, which was not calm and was not distress, but was something more complicated, the specific expression of a person who has just walked into the place they have been running from for years and found that they did not break when they got there. "You didn't run," Ethan said. "I didn't." The storm blew hard against the walls. Neither of them moved. "I heard what you said," he told her. "Not your fear. Your hands. You needed to hear it. How did you know?" he asked. And he meant it genuinely. How did she know, in that exact moment, what was happening in him well enough to name it and pull him back with 4 words? Clara looked at him steadily. "Because I know what it looks like when someone is about to let the past make the decision for them," she said. "I nearly let it happen to me the first winter after Thomas died. I nearly sold the ranch in January of '82 because I was standing in the cold looking at the debt and looking at the empty house, and I could not make myself believe that any effort I made would change the outcome." She paused. "And then I went out and fed the cattle in the morning because they needed to be fed regardless of what I believed." She looked at the brace he had built. "You fed the cattle," she said. Ethan understood what she meant. He looked at the braced beams, at the pitchfork handles angled with mathematical precision between the stall posts, at the structure he had built in the middle of a storm, with nothing but his hands and his knowledge, and the decision to stop running from the thing he was best at. "Clara," he said. She looked at him. "I'm not going to leave when the fence is done," he said. The statement was not a question and not a proposal, and not anything that could be neatly labeled. It was the truth said plainly, in the manner of a man who had just discovered that he was done being cautious about the things he wanted to build. Clara looked at him for a long moment. The storm pressed against the barn walls. The horses moved in the stalls, the braced corner held. "I didn't ask you to," she said. "I know you didn't," Ethan said. "I'm telling you anyway." She held his gaze. Something moved in her face, not the almost smile, not the controlled composure, but the thing underneath all of it, the thing she kept most carefully. The part of Clara Whitlock that had been standing alone in an empty house in January of 1882, with no reason to believe anything she built would last, and had gone out and fed the cattle anyway. "All right," she said, quietly, the way she said the things that mattered most. Outside, the storm had begun to ease. The wind dropped in increments, each increment a degree of recovery, and by the time the worst of it was past, the barn stood and the horses stood and the braces held, and the man and the woman standing in the middle of it were both still there. Ethan was the one who found the breach in the fence. He discovered it at dawn, walking the west pasture line in the gray early light, the storm damage from previous night visible in the scattered debris across the property. A section of the fence, not one he had built, a section that predated his arrival and that he had flagged in his early assessment as needing eventual replacement, had failed under the sustained wind pressure. 12 feet of rail and wire down in the mud, the cattle had gone through. 7 head, from the tracks, into the unfenced rangeland that bordered the Whitlock property to the north. And that unfenced rangeland, Ethan knew, bordered the southern edge of Preston Voss's holdings. He stood at the breach for a moment. Then he went back to the house. Clara was at the kitchen table with the lamp lit, her hand bandaged where the cut from the pitchfork handle had been cleaned and wrapped, writing in her ledger with the other hand. She looked up when he came in. He told her about the fence. He told her about the tracks. He told her where the unfenced rangeland led. Clara set her pen down. The specific silence that followed was not the silence of a woman who did not understand the situation. It was the silence of a woman who understood it completely and was moving, with the rapid, disciplined efficiency of her particular intelligence, through all of its implications simultaneously. 7 cattle in Voss's rangeland. Voss, who had just watched his financial pressure fail and his reputation campaign produce inadequate results. Voss, who the previous week had been reassessing his strategy with the particular expression of a man moving to a new position on the board. He'll claim them, Clara said. It was not a question. Stray cattle on open rangeland, Ethan said. He has a right to hold them pending claim. He'll hold them past the date I need to deliver the remaining herd for the Fitch payment, Clara said. Her voice was completely level. If I'm short 7 head, the margin shifts. Not catastrophically, but it shifts. She looked at the ledger. He knows my numbers. Somehow he knows my numbers. He has a cousin on the lending board, Ethan said. The lending board has your payment records. Clara closed her eyes for 3 seconds. Then open them. I need those cattle back before the delivery date, she said. Yes, that means I need to go onto Voss's land and claim them formally, with witnesses, before he has them counted and registered as strays. She looked at Ethan. That means I need to go today. Then we go today, Ethan said. Clara looked at him. I need you to understand what going on to Voss's property means, she said. He has men. He has legal standing on his own land. He will use both. I understand, Ethan said, if something goes wrong. Clara, he said. She stopped. He looked at her directly. I told you last night I'm not leaving when the fence is done. I meant it in the general sense. I also mean it in the specific sense of this morning. He held her gaze. We go today, together. We bring Gravis or another witness from town who isn't connected to Voss. We make the formal claim in front of that witness. We bring the cattle home. She studied him. You're certain, she said. I've never been more certain of anything, Ethan said, and the truth of it was so complete and uncomplicated that it came out sounding like the simplest thing in the world, which perhaps it was. Clara stood. She picked up the ledger and the pen and put them in their place on the shelf, with the precision and care of a woman who intends to return to them. I'll get the horses, she said. I'll get Gravis, Ethan said. They moved. Not because the situation was not serious, it was the most serious it had been. Not because Voss wasn't a formidable opponent, he was the most formidable opponent Clara had faced. But because the alternative to moving was standing still, and neither of them had been built for stillness when something needed doing. The breach in the fence was behind them. The cattle were ahead of them. And Ethan Calloway, who had spent 10 years defining himself as a man who fixed things temporarily and moved before he could be required to care about the outcome, was saddling his horse with the deliberate calm of a man who has decided, finally and completely, that he is exactly where he is going to be. Gravis did not hesitate. That was the first thing that surprised Ethan that morning, not the speed of it, but the quality of it. When Ethan rode to the lumber merchants and explained, in plain and economical language, what had happened and what was needed, Gravis listened without interrupting and then reached behind the counter for his coat. Give me 2 minutes, he said. Not I'll think about it. Not that's a difficult position. 2 minutes. He was outside in 90 seconds, his coat on and his hat straight. And he mounted his horse with the quiet purposefulness of a man who has decided that there are moments when staying out of other people's business is itself a choice with consequences, and he has made his choice. You understand what this means, Ethan said, going out there with us. I understand what it means if I don't, Gravis said. He looked at Ethan directly. I've been selling to this county for 19 years. I know every transaction Preston Voss has used to put pressure on people who couldn't afford to push back. He adjusted his hat. Clara Whitlock can push back. I intend to help her do it. They rode to the ranch and found Clara waiting at the gate with her own horse saddled and her notebook in her coat pocket. She looked at Gravis with an expression that carried gratitude, without performing it, a quick, direct meeting of eyes and a single nod that said everything. "Thank you, Mr. Gravis," she said. "Don't thank me yet," Gravis said. "Let's get your cattle." The three of them rode north. The Voss property line was marked by its own fence, a fence that was, Ethan noted with professional precision, well-maintained and expensively built, which was the fence of a man with money to spend, rather than a man who had built it himself. Beyond that fence, the rangeland opened up broad and flat, and it took Ethan less than 10 minutes of reading the ground to find where Clara's S7 cattle had drifted in the storm's aftermath. They were in a natural low hollow a quarter-mile inside the Voss property line, grouped together the way cattle group when they are uncertain, shoulder to shoulder, heads low. Alive. Clara counted them from the saddle. 7. They haven't been moved, Ethan's. He may not know yet, Clara said. Or he knows and he's waiting for us to come so he can make the encounter happen on his terms. She was right about the second possibility. They were still 50 yards from the cattle when two of Voss's ranch hands appeared from the direction of the main buildings, moving at a pace that was not casual, the pace of men who have been watching and are now responding to what they see. Ethan moved his horse to Clara's left. He did not do it dramatically. He simply moved the way he had moved to her left at the road gate weeks ago, the positioning of a person who has made a decision about where they stand. The two ranch hands pulled up 12 feet away. The older one, a broad man with a gray-streaked beard named, as Ethan would learn, Sutter, looked at the three of them, and then at the cattle in the hollow, and then back at them, with the expression of someone running a quick calculation. "These cattle are on Voss land," Sutter said. "These cattle are mine," Clara said. "The brand is Whitlock. You're welcome to examine it from where you sit." "Storm strays on open range are held pending formal claims," Sutter said. It was a recitation. Someone had told him exactly what to say, which meant this had been anticipated. "Then I am making the formal claim," Clara said, "in front of a witness." She looked at Gravis. "Mr. Gravis present," Gravis said dryly. Sutter looked at Gravis with the particular discomfort of a man who expected 2 people and got 3. And the third is a known member of the community, with no visible connection to the situation he was briefed on. "Mr. Voss will need to be notified," Sutter said. "Notify him," Clara said. "We'll wait." They waited. It took 20 minutes. Ethan spent those 20 minutes sitting completely still on his horse, which was a skill he had learned in difficult situations. That stillness itself was a communication. That a person who cannot be made to fidget or shift or fill silence with reassuring words is a person who is confident in their position. He felt Clara doing the same thing beside him. Gravis spent the time examining his fingernails. Voss arrived on a good horse with 2 more men behind him. He looked at the gathering Clara, Ethan, Gravis, his own 2 hands, and processed it in the Spansikimection, with the rapid intelligence of a man who understands power arrangements instinctively. He looked at Gravis longest. "Martin," he said, "didn't expect to see you out here." "Didn't expect to be here," Gravis said pleasantly. "Here I am." Voss moved his attention to Clara. "Mrs. Whitlock," he said, the reasonable voice, the accommodating manner. "I understand there was some storm damage to your south fence." "North fence," Clara said. "Pre-existing section's already been repaired." She held his gaze. "I'm here for my cattle, Mr. Voss, of course." He looked at the 7 animals in the hollow. "Storm strays are a county matter. There's a process." "The process begins with a formal claim made in front of a witness," Clara said. "I have made it. Mr. Gravis is my witness. My brand is on every one of those animals, and you are welcome to verify it." She did not raise her voice. She did not rush the words. "I would like them returned to me today." Voss was quiet for a moment. He was doing the calculation that Clara had predicted he would do, measuring the risk of holding the cattle against the reality of standing in front of a community witness with no legal ground that hadn't just been removed from under him by Clara's arrival before the stray registration could be filed. He was also, Ethan could see, looking at Ethan, not with anger. With the specific, assessing look of a man who is revising his understanding of a situation he thought he had mapped correctly. He had understood the Whitlock Ranch as an isolated property, a woman alone, a situation with no reinforcement. He was looking at that understanding and finding it insufficient. "Sutter," Voss said. "Sir, help Mrs. Whitlock's man move her cattle back through the property line." Sutter moved. The cattle were moved. It took 30 minutes, and it was done without ceremony, and when the last of the 7 animals was back on the Whitlock side of the fence line, Clara turned her horse to face Voss across the distance. "Thank you, Mr. Voss," she said, correctly, courteously. Without a single degree of warmth, Voss looked at her. "You have a timber note," he said. It was the last card he held, and he laid it with the careful, quiet precision of a man playing from a diminished hand. "I'm aware of my note," Clara said. "I want you to know the offer for the property remains open." "I know it does," Clara said. "My answer remains the same." She turned her horse. She rode home. Ethan rode beside her, and Gravis rode on her other side, and no one spoke for the first quarter mile because the silence was the right size for what had just happened, too large for ordinary words, requiring the particular dignity of being left alone. It was Gravis who finally spoke. "You know he's not finished," he said. "I know," Clara said. "September's still coming." "September's still coming," she agreed. "And I'll meet it." She met it. The Fitch payment had covered the banknote with a margin of $63, which was not a comfortable margin but was a margin, and Clara had it documented and delivered to the bank on September 12th, 3 days before the deadline. Because arriving 3 days early was its own statement. She brought the receipt home and set it on the kitchen table and looked at it for a moment. Then she put it in the ledger. Ethan was at the pump seal. He was on his 3rd attempt at the fitting, a replacement part that had required 2 trips to town before he found the right gauge, and when Clara came out and told him the note was paid, he set the wrench down and looked at her. "Paid," he said. She said. He picked up the wrench. "Good," he said. She almost laughed. Not quite, but closer than he had ever seen. "That's all you have to say?" she asked. "What would you like me to say?" She thought about it. "Nothing," she said. "Good is the right word." She looked at the pump. "How's the seal?" "Another hour," he said. "The fitting was the wrong thread the first time." "This one's right." She nodded and went back inside. Ethan worked the fitting into place with the particular satisfaction of a man who has found the right part for the right job and can feel the precision of it in his hands, the specific, reliable click of a thing fitting as it was meant to fit, doing what it was built to do. He thought about September 12th. He thought about a note paid 3 days early. He thought about Clara walking into that bank with a documented payment and setting it on a counter in front of a lending board that had moved her deadline at someone else's request. And the look on her face as she walked back out, he had not been there to see it, but he could construct it precisely from everything he had come to know about her. No triumph, no visible satisfaction, just the quiet, complete competence of a woman who had said she would do something and had done it. He worked the pump seal until it seated correctly. Tested it. It held. He cleaned the wrench and put it away and stood for a moment in the particular stillness of a job finished correctly. Then he went to the western fence corner because the last 8 posts were still waiting, and he drove them through the afternoon with the steady, unhurried pace of a man who no longer has a deadline but still has a standard. That was when Nora Hensley came back. She arrived at late afternoon with the look of someone carrying news that is simultaneously bad and not as bad as it could be, which is a specific expression Ethan had learned to read. Clara came to the gate. "Bowles is calling another meeting," Nora said. She twisted her gloves the same way as before. "Next week." Different agenda. "He's Clara, he's found something." She pressed her lips together. "He's found someone." Clara went very still. "Who?" she said. "A man named Coulter," Nora said, "from Missouri." She stopped. Looked at Ethan. Back at Clara. "He claims he has a matter of record against your hired man." The name went through Ethan like a blade. He had not moved. He was standing at the gate with the post driver in his hand, and he had not moved. But the air around him had changed in the way that air changes around a person when something from their past arrives in their present, without warning and without mercy. Clara did not look at him. She looked at Nora. What kind of matter of record? She asked. Her voice was exactly as steady as it always was. A structural failure, Nora said. In Missouri, 8 years ago. He's saying Bowles is saying it makes the man's character and his work here questionable. She finally looked at Ethan, and her expression was not accusatory. It was the expression of a woman delivering a wound she was not responsible for inflicting. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I thought you should know before the meeting. Thank you, Nora, Clara said. After Nora left, the quiet stretched between them. Clara turned. Ethan was looking at the western fence line. At the posts he had just driven. At the wire tensioned correctly between them. At the corner he had built with the same hands that had built the loading structure in Missouri 8 years ago. The same hands that had also built temporary braces in a storm-damaged barn 2 weeks ago and held them until the roof stopped moving. The same hands. He did not speak first. Clara did. You told me about this, she said. Yes, 8 years ago. Missouri. A man named Coulter, yes. You told me the structure failed because of an error in load calculation. Yes. And you told me you paid his medical costs and that you have built every structure since with double and triple verification. She paused. Is there anything you told me that was not accurate? He turned and looked at her. No, nothing. She held his gaze. Then Bowles can hold his meeting, she said. And say what he will say. And the people in that room can decide what they believe. She turned toward the house. My fence is standing, my note is paid, my cattle are home. She stopped and looked back at him. And the man who helped me do all of that is still here. That is the only record I intend to answer to. Ethan opened his mouth. Closed it. Tried again. Clara, he said, if this creates problems for you for the ranch for your standing in this county. Ethan. She said his name the way she said the things that were not negotiable. I have spent 2 years in this county being judged by people who decided what I was capable of before they looked at what I had done. She took one step back toward him. I will not now judge you by what someone else has decided to say about you, rather than by what I have seen with my own eyes. She looked at the fence. What I have seen is good work, honest work. Work that has held through a Kansas summer and a serious storm and man who tried to use every tool available to take this ranch from me. She met his eyes. That is my testimony, and I will give it to anyone in this county who wants to hear it. He stood in front of her and felt something break open in his chest, not painfully, but with the specific relief of something that has been held under pressure for a very long time, finally being released. He had been carrying Coulter for 8 years. He had been carrying the weight of that one error through 10 different counties and 40 different fence lines, and a decade of deliberate, self-imposed limitation, never building anything he could not walk away from. Never staying anywhere long enough to be trusted with something that mattered. And here was this woman, who knew everything, standing in front of him and saying, I see what you have built. That is what counts. I don't know how to thank you for that, he said. Then don't, Clara said simply. Just keep building things that hold. She went inside. Ethan stood at the fence line for a long time. The evening was coming in with the particular gold of late summer, the quality of light that lasts only a few weeks at the end of August, when the heat has finally begun to ease, and the air has the first suggestion of autumn in it. The western fence corner was complete. Every post he had planned to drive was in the ground. Every wire section he had planned to string was strung. The fence ran from corner to corner across the full perimeter of the Whitlock property, rebuilt and standing, and it was the best fence work he had ever done. He knew that. He also knew it was the best, because he had done it for reasons that were different from any reason he had worked for before. He had not done it for wages, though he had accepted wages. He had not done it to fill 6 weeks before moving on, though that had been the plan. He had done it because somewhere in the course of building it, the fence had stopped being a job and had started being something he did not yet have the right word for. Something that was his to protect. The meeting happened the following Tuesday. Bowles called it, and Voss's people filled the hall, and a man was brought forward who was introduced as a witness from Missouri, a heavy-set man in his 50s with one arm that ended at the wrist. and he stood in front of the assembled county with the dignity of someone who has lived with a hard thing for a long time and is not particularly interested in performing it for anyone's benefit. Ethan was not there, Clara was not there, but Harold Hensley was there, and so was Gravis. And so was a third person who had not been at the previous meeting, a rancher named Duval, who had been at the Fitch sale and seen Clara's cattle, and heard from Fitch's own buyer that the Whitlock herd was the best managed mid-size operation he had assessed in 3 years of circuit work. What happened in that meeting Ethan and Clara learned the next day from Nora and from Gravis himself, who rode out to tell them directly. The man from Missouri, Coulter, had stood in front of the room and said what he said. He described the structural failure. He described the injury. He described Ethan Calloway by name and gave the year and the county. And then he said something that no one, apparently including Bowles, had anticipated. He said that Ethan Calloway had paid every dollar of his medical costs within 3 months of the accident. That he had come to Coulter personally, before leaving Missouri, and sat with him and looked him in the eye and said he was sorry without asking for forgiveness. That he had left a written account with the local record office detailing exactly what had failed and why, so that no other builder would make the same error. "I'm not here to defend the man," Coulter said, as Gravis reported it, in the particular flat tone of someone who is telling the truth without editorializing. "I'm here because I was told my name was being used in a meeting I didn't authorize. And I'll say plainly to anyone in this room who's curious, the man made an error. He answered for it fully and directly and without being pressed to. In my experience, that's more than most men do." He looked at Bowles. "What you do with that is your business. But you'll not use my injury to make a case I don't agree with." The room had gone very quiet, Gravis reported. Bowles had attempted to redirect. Had tried to argue that the principle of the concern remained valid, regardless of Coulter's characterization. Harold Hensley had stood up and said, with the comfortable authority of a man who has extended credit for 19 years and knows what reliability looks like, "I've heard enough about principles from men who are borrowing someone else's injury to make a point they couldn't make on their own. I'm going home." He left. Gravis left behind him. Duval stood up and looked at Bowles and said, "I buy from fair operations. The Whitlock Ranch is a fair operation. That's the only assessment I'm qualified to give, and the only one that matters to my business." He left. The meeting dissolved without resolution, which was its own resolution. Bowles did not call a third meeting. Voss made no further contact with the ranch. The September note remained paid. On a Thursday evening in late September, when the heat had finally broken and the air had the first real edge of autumn in it, Clara sat at the kitchen table with the ledger open, and Ethan sat across from her with a cup of coffee that had gone cold because neither of them had remembered to drink it. And they were doing what they had increasingly done in the evenings, talking. Not about the ranch, though the ranch was there. Not about Voss, who had receded to the background with the particular quiet of a man who has exhausted his available strategies. They were talking about the kind of things two people talk about when they have stopped needing to be careful about what they reveal to each other. Clara was talking about her father, a measured, precise man who had taught her double-entry bookkeeping at the kitchen table when she was 11, who had believed without reservation that a woman's intelligence was a thing to be developed rather than apologized for, who had died of a stroke when she was 19 without ever meeting Thomas Whitlock, and never knowing that his daughter would end up standing at a Kansas fence gate telling a wealthy cattle baron that she intended to outlast him. "He would have liked you," Clara said. She said it the way she said things she meant simply, without prelude. Ethan looked up from his cold coffee. "Your father?" "Yes." She looked at the ledger, then back at him. He respected people who did what they said they would do, and stopped before saying more than they meant. She paused. "You do that, I try," Ethan said. "You succeed." She turned a page in the ledger. He also respected people who could admit when they were wrong. He said it was the rarest quality in a person, rarer than intelligence or skill, because it required something. Those things didn't genuine humility. Ethan thought about Missouri. About sitting across from Coulter in a plain room and looking him in the eye and saying the words that needed to be said, without padding them with self-justification. I wasn't humble, he said. I was destroyed. Sometimes those feel the same from the inside, Clara said. They look different from the outside. She closed the ledger. Coulter knew the difference. He said so, apparently. You heard what he said in that meeting. I heard what he said, Clara confirmed. She looked at Ethan. Does it change anything, knowing he said it publicly? Ethan thought about this honestly. It changes something, he said. I don't know what to call it yet. You don't have to call it yet, Clara said. It can be unnamed for a while. He looked at her. She was looking at the table, her hands resting flat on the closed ledger, her face in the particular evening light of the kitchen lamp that made everything in the room look warmer and closer than it was in daylight. She had let her hair down from its daytime pins, not in any deliberate way, just the practical relief of the end of a long day, and it was longer than he had understood, dark and simply arranged, resting against the back of her collar. He had been sitting across this table from her for weeks. He had not been sitting across this table from her, in the same way he was sitting across it now. Something had shifted again, not dramatically, not with announcement, but with the gradual, certain quality of a season changing. The kind of shift you notice not when it begins, but when you look up one day and realize the light is entirely different from what it was. Oh, Clara, he said. I want to stay, he said. Not through storm season, not through the winter repairs. Permanently, he held her gaze. I want to stay because I have spent 10 years going from place to place convincing myself that moving on was a practical choice when it was actually a habit. A habit built out of fear. He set the cold coffee down. I am done with the habit. Clara looked at him for a long moment. What are you saying specifically, she said. She was not being difficult. She was being herself, a woman who valued precision and did not assume she knew what a person meant when she could ask them directly. I'm saying I would like to court you, Ethan said. Properly, with your full knowledge of what I am and what I've done and who I intend to be. He paused. And with your permission, which I am asking for directly, because you are not a woman who appreciates being managed. Clara's expression did something complicated and quiet. She looked at the table. She looked at the ledger under her hands. She looked at the window, which showed the dark Kansas evening and the faint suggestion of stars through the glass. Then she looked at him. You have my permission, she said. 2 words, said the way the things that cost something are said. Ethan let out a breath he had not known he was holding. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet, Clara said. I am not an easy woman to court. I know that, Ethan said. I have strong opinions about the ledger and the feed schedule and the east pasture rotation. I'm aware. I will tell you when I think you're wrong. I count on it. Something that was fully, completely, unmistakably a smile appeared on Clara Whitlock's face. Not the almost smile, not the controlled near expression he had been cataloging for weeks. A real smile, warm and direct and not performing anything, a smile that was simply itself. It was the first time he had seen it. He thought it was very possibly the most honest thing he had ever seen. All right then, she said. She opened the ledger again. The east pasture rotation, she said. I want your opinion on the spring timing. He pulled his chair closer to the table and looked at the ledger. They talked about the east pasture for an hour. At some point, the lamp burned lower, and the coffee was replaced with fresh, and the autumn wind moved through the gaps in the window frame. And Clara pulled her shawl around her shoulders without interrupting the sentence she was in the middle of. And Ethan reached across the table and turned the ledger so she could see a column better without having to lean, and neither of them remarked on how close his hand was to hers when he did it. Outside, the fence stood. The whole of it, from corner to corner, rebuilt and straight, and holding the north corner, where the first post had gone in on the first morning, the south section that faced the road and told the county a story it had not expected to hear. The western corner he had finished in the long afternoon light after Clara paid the bank. A fence does not prove perfection. It proves someone cares enough to keep building it. Ethan Calloway, who had arrived in July believing himself to be a man defined by what he had broken, sat at Clara Whitlock's kitchen table in the early days of autumn and understood, clearly and without the static of avoidance, that he had been wrong about himself for 8 years. Not because nothing had gone wrong, but because everything he had done since had been the answer to it. And the woman sitting across from him, who had never asked him to be anything other than what he actually was, had known that before he did. The ledger lay open between them, the lamp burned. The fence held. The courting, as it turned out, looked almost identical to everything they had already been doing. That was the first thing Ethan noticed. They still rose before dawn. They still worked the fence line in the cool morning hours before the autumn chill gave way to the mild midday warmth that Kansas offered in September, like a consolation for the brutality of the summer just past. They still ate meals at the same table and talked over the ledger in the evenings and disagreed productively about the east pasture rotation and the timing of the winter feed order. The difference was small and enormous simultaneously. The difference was that now, when Ethan reached across the table to turn the ledger, neither of them pretended not to notice his hand near hers. The difference was that Clara no longer pulled her chair back to its proper distance after those moments. The difference was that when she handed him the morning coffee, their fingers touched on the cup handle, and she did not move away immediately, and neither did he. And the house that they stayed like that was the most honest half-second Ethan had experienced in years. Small things, enormous things. October arrived and brought the first genuine cold with it, the kind of cold that had teeth in the morning and required the barn work to be done with gloves on. Ethan repaired the south barn roof properly, not the emergency brace from the storm, which had held magnificently through 6 weeks and 2 more rain events, but a genuine repair with new lumber and correct joinery that would hold through a Kansas winter without complaint. He did the work while Clara managed the remaining cattle that had not gone with the Fitch sale, a smaller herd kept back for the spring, young stock mostly, animals she intended to carry through to a better weight before the next market run. She worked them with the same methodical patience she brought to everything, and Ethan, up on the roof with the hammer and the good lumber, watched her in the yard below without intending to and felt the specific, recurring warmth of watching someone he cared about do something they were genuinely good at. He hit the nail wrong and had to pull it back out. He paid better attention after that. It was mid-October when the letter came. It arrived in Clara's name from a legal firm in Wichita, and she opened it at the kitchen table with Ethan sitting across from her, and read it in the particular silence she used for things that required her full concentration. He watched her face. She read it twice, then she set it down and looked at him. "Voss is selling," she said. "His operation," Clara said. "Not all of it, but the northern holdings, the rangeland that borders my property. He's selling it to a land company out of Kansas City." She looked at the letter. "The land company has sent this letter to all adjacent property owners, informing them of the sale and offering right of first refusal on the parcel nearest their boundary." Ethan looked at the letter. "How much?" he asked. Clara named the figure. It was not a small number. It was not a number that existed anywhere in the Whitlock ledger at present, and both of them knew that without checking. "Why is he selling?" Ethan asked. "The letter doesn't say." Clara folded it. "But Voss doesn't sell rangeland unless something has shifted in his position." She looked at the folded letter. "Someone applied pressure from a direction I wasn't watching." Ethan thought about this. He thought about Gravis, about Harold Hensley leaving the meeting, about Duval the rancher who had spoken at the second meeting, about fair operations and the Whitlock herd, about the small, cumulative weight of a community that had been deciding, piece by piece, which direction it was actually going to stand. "I think Larkspur County made a decision," he said. Clara looked at him. "About what?" "About which story it believed," Ethan said. "The one Voss was telling, or the one your fence was telling?" She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she looked at the letter again. "I can't afford the parcel," she said. "Not now. Not without a loan, and I won't put another note on this land." No, Ethan agreed, but the land company won't be a Voss, she said. A land company out of Kansas City doesn't have a cousin on the lending board. They don't have arrangements with the lumber merchant or the feed supplier. She set the letter on the table. They're an impersonal entity with a financial interest. Which is almost restful by comparison. Almost, Ethan said. She looked at him, and the almost smile was there, the real one he had been seeing more frequently, since the evening she had given him permission to court her, the smile that didn't perform anything. Almost, she agreed. 3 weeks later, Ethan rode to Wichita. He told Clara he had business there. He did not specify the nature of the business because he was not ready to, and she looked at him with the direct, evaluating gaze of a woman who could tell when a person was withholding something and was choosing to let them withhold it because she trusted the reason, even if she didn't know it. How long, she asked. 3 at most. She nodded. The pump seal is holding. I checked it yesterday. I know, he said. I checked it the day before. You don't need to worry about the ranch, she said. I ran it alone for 2 years. I know that too, Ethan said. He looked at her. I'm not worried about the ranch. She understood what he meant. The understanding passed between them in the particular, quick, clear way that understanding moves between people who have spent months paying attention to each other. Be careful, he said. He rode to Wichita. What he did there took 2 days, and it required 3 separate meetings, one with a land broker, one with a man he had done work for years ago who still owed him a professional favor, and one with a banking institution that was not the Larkspur County Bank and had no cousins on its lending board. He came back on the 3rd day with documents in his coat pocket and rode directly to the ranch without stopping in town. I was at the western fence corner checking the posts, a routine inspection, the kind she did every few weeks, running her hands along the wire the way she had run her hand along the north corner post the first time she checked his work. She saw him ride in and turned. He dismounted and came to her and took the documents from his coat pocket and held them out. She looked at them, then at him. What is this, she said. Not a question, the flat, careful tone of a woman who is reading the situation and making sure she reads it correctly before she reacts to it. The northern parcel, he said. She went very still. The land company agreed to sell to a private buyer at a 10% reduction in exchange for cash settlement rather than a financed transaction, Ethan said. I had savings, funds I've been accumulating for 11 years without a permanent home to spend them on. He met her eyes. I purchased the parcel. It's adjacent to your property. With your permission, I would like to add it to the ranch. Clara looked at the documents for a long time. He could see her reading not the words, which she would examine with the full precision of her intelligence later, but the fact of them. The fact of what they represented. Someone who did not have to do this, doing it. Someone who could have kept that money as the portable security of a man who moves frequently and spent it instead on a piece of land next to a woman he intended to stay with. Her jaw moved once. She pressed her lips together. Ethan, she said. Yes, this is you cannot make a decision of this size without... Clara. He said her name the way she said his when she needed him to pay full attention. She stopped. I am not a man who does things halfway, he said. I tried to be for 10 years and it made me miserable and peripatetic, and I drove 40 fence lines without a single thing to show for any of them except the money I just spent on that parcel. He held her gaze. I'm done doing things halfway. She looked at the documents. Back at him. The parcel borders the north fence, she said. Yes, the north fence is the section you rebuilt first. First section I set foot on, Ethan said. First morning. You came through the gate and told me to fix whichever one I could. Clara pressed her hand against her mouth for a moment. Just a moment. Then she lowered it. You remember that, she said. I remember everything about that morning, Ethan said. The dress you were wearing. The fence post gauge in your hand. The way you looked at the fence and then at me like you were deciding which of us was a worse problem. He held her eyes. I remember thinking I had never met anyone who made needing help look like a form of courage. The document was trembling slightly in her hands. She looked down at it and he understood, watching her, that she was not looking at the document. She was looking at the distance between who she had been in January of 1882, a woman alone in an empty house, with a debt she could not see the end of, and who she was standing at this fence corner. On a completely repaired property, with a paid note and a delivered herd and a man handing her the land that the man who had tried to take her ranch had just been forced to sell. It was a long distance. She had walked every step of it herself. "I can't accept this as a gift," she said. "It's not a gift," Ethan said. "It's an investment," he paused, "in a ranch I intend to be part of. In a future I would like to build with you, if you're willing. In a piece of land that shares a fence line with everything you've spent 2 years fighting for." He let that sit for a second. "You can put it in the ledger under joint holdings." "I would like the record to be accurate." Clara looked at him. "Joint holdings," she repeated. "That's what it would be," he said. "If you're willing." She held the documents against her chest. She looked at the north fence, the corner, where the first post had gone in on the first morning, the cedar he had cut from her timber lot, and with the particular care of a man who understood that the first thing you build sets the standard for everything that follows. "I'm willing," she said. 2 words, the same weight as every other 2 words she had ever said that mattered. Ethan Calloway proposed to Clara Whitlock on a Friday in November, standing at the north fence corner in the first cold of real winter, with the Kansas sky enormous and gray above them and the smell of coming snow in the air. He did not go down on one knee. She was not that kind of woman, and he was not that kind of man, and the ground was frozen solid in any case, and what mattered was not the gesture but the words, which he had been arranging and rearranging in his head for 3 weeks, with the same careful attention he gave to load calculations. He said them plainly. He said that he loved her. The word came out without apology or embellishment, which was the only way it should come out of a man who means it. He said he understood what he was asking, and he understood the value of what she had built, and that he was not asking to take any part of that from her. He said he wanted to stand beside it. To be the person she reached for when the fence needed another hand, and when the ledger needed another set of eyes, and when the storm came fast and she needed someone who would walk into the damaged barn without running. He said he was done running. He said he would like to stop for good. Clara listened to all of it without interrupting, which was her way. She was a woman who let people finish their sentences before she formed a response, which was a rarer quality than it should be, and one he had loved about her. From the first week he understood she did it consistently. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. The wind moved through the wire. "You said you love me," she said. "Yes, you haven't said it before." "No," he said. "I wanted to be certain before I said it. I am not a person who says things he isn't certain of." She looked at the fence. "I know that about you," she said. Very quietly, Clara. She turned and looked at him. "Will you marry me?" he said. She pressed her hand flat against the top fence wire, the testing pressure, the check for tension, the habit of a woman who trusted her hands to tell her what was solid. The wire held. "Yes," she said. They married in the spring. The wedding was on the Whitlock Ranch, in the yard beside the repaired barn, on a Saturday in April when the Kansas air had the specific, temporary perfection of early spring, warm enough to stand outside without a coat, cool enough to be comfortable, the pasture grass just beginning to show green, through the last of the winter brown. Nora Hensley organized the food because Nora organized things, and this was a thing worth organizing. Harold Hensley stood in the first row of neighbors with his wife's hand in his, and the expression of a man who is quietly, sincerely glad for how something turned out. Gravis came and stood in the back with his hat in his hands and did not say much, which was his way, but he stayed through the entire ceremony and shook Ethan's hand afterward with the grip of a man transferring something real. Duval brought a bottle of good whiskey and the information that he had recommended the Whitlock operation to 2 other circuit buyers and expected both of them to come through in the autumn. Even Fitch sent a letter. Aldous had told him about the wedding. His letter was brief and businesslike and ended with the line, "The herd was the best I've seen in 3 years on this circuit. Build it well," which was, from Delbert Fitch, something very close to poetry. Clara wore a dress that was not her working dress and not her old Sunday dress, but a new one, pale blue cotton, simple and well made, with no apron over it because it was not a working day. Though anyone who looked at Clara Whitlock understood that the distinction between her working self and her dress self was a matter of clothing only, and not of the woman underneath, who was always, in all circumstances, fully and completely present. She had bought a winter coat in September, as he had told her to. She wore it to the wedding because the morning was still cool, and then she took it off when the sun was fully up because she did not need it anymore. Ethan stood beside her in front of the minister, a plain-spoken man who had been told to keep it short and did, and he said the words he was asked to say with the specific quality of attention he gave to all things that mattered. He meant every word. When it was finished and the minister had said what ministers say, Clara turned to Ethan and looked at, with the expression he had first seen in the lamplight of an October evening, not the almost smile. Not the composed efficiency of a woman managing her property and her position and her grief, but the full unguarded face of a person who has decided they are safe enough to let themselves be seen. "Husband," she said, trying the word. He almost laughed. He had not done that in a long time. "Wife," he said. She did laugh, brief and warm. Then she took his arm and they walked back to where the neighbors were waiting, and the day was warm, and the pasture was green, and the fence stood along every edge of the property, straight and solid in the April light. Years passed the way years pass on working land, not easily, not gently, but with the particular richness of a life that has genuine stakes and genuine rewards, and the specific satisfaction of knowing that what you are building is yours, and that you built it with your own hands. They expanded the herd. They bought a second wagon. They reseeded the east pasture correctly in the spring of 1885, and the cacareings increased by a third by autumn, which Clara had predicted and Ethan had bet against quietly, and paid the ledger's accounting of being wrong with good humor. The northern parcel, the land that Voss had sold and Ethan had purchased, was fenced in the summer of 1885, a full perimeter fence that Ethan built with the same cedar and the same care as the original repair. This time with Clara working beside him, as she had worked from the beginning, not because she had to, but because the land was theirs and the fence was theirs, and she had never been a woman who stood back from what was hers. They argued, because two people with strong opinions and genuine investment in the same piece of land will argue. They argued about the winter feed order and the spring rotation and the question of whether the south barn needed a full new roof or whether the patched sections would hold another 2 years. Clara was right about the roof. Ethan was right about the feed order. They kept score in the ledger, which Clara had maintained with the same precision since the first day Ethan had asked her about it, and which now had 2 sets of handwriting in it, hers, precise and deliberate, and his, which was neater than she expected and slightly smaller than hers, filling the margins with calculations she had not asked for, but always found useful. Preston Voss left Larkspur County in the spring of 1886. No announcement, no ceremony. He sold his primary holdings to an Eastern land company and moved, as far as anyone knew, to Colorado. Larkspur County noted his departure, the way communities note the departure of large weather systems, with the particular relief of people who have been bracing for so long they had forgotten what it felt like not to. Harold Hensley extended Clara's credit terms permanently and without conditions. Gravis started including the Whitlock Ranch on his list of recommended properties when other ranchers asked him where the reliable operations were. He said it without embellishment, the same way he said everything, the Whitlock-Callaway place. Best maintained fence in the county, and the people who built it know what they're doing. The name change Whitlock-Callaway had been Clara's decision, offered without being asked for, on an evening in December of their first married year when she came to the table with a revised version of the ledger's front page. Ethan had looked at it. "You changed the header," he said. "It's accurate," Clara said. "You're on the deed. You should be on the ledger." He looked at the 2 names together. "Whitlock first," he said. "Thomas built this land," Clara said. "That deserves to stay." She looked at Ethan. "You built what it became. That deserves to be there, too." He had not trusted his voice enough to answer right away. He had simply put his hand over hers where it rested on the page. She had turned her hand over and held his. They sat like that for a moment, two people at a kitchen table in December. In the lamplight, with the ledger open between them and the fence holding in the dark outside, and everything they had built together, arranged in the quiet, solid, unremarkable fact of a life that had become exactly what they had chosen to make it. In Larkspur County, people still told the story years later. They told it the way communities tell the stories that matter to them, not always accurately in every detail, but accurately in the thing that counted, the central true fact that the story was built around. They told about the summer of 1884, when a widow woman with debt of failing fence and a wealthy neighbor who wanted her land stood at her own gate and refused to move. They told about the cowboy who came to fix a fence and fixed something else instead. They told about a community that had to decide twice which story it was going to believe about a woman, the one being told by people with an interest in her failure, or the one being told by the fence itself. They told it to their daughters. They told it in the particular tone reserved for stories that are meant to carry something forward, not nostalgia, not sentiment, but instruction. Here is what it looks like when someone refuses to be defined by other people's expectations. Here is what it looks like when a man decides to stop running. Here is what happens when two broken things find each other and discover they were never as broken as they believed. Clara Whitlock had been told for 2 years that her size made her weak, that her situation made her vulnerable, that a woman alone on a failing ranch in the summer heat of Kansas had no realistic future to build toward. She had taken those assessments and put them in the same place she put all information that was inaccurate and unhelpful. She had gone to work. Ethan Calloway had told himself for 10 years that one mistake had made him a man who could not be trusted with anything permanent, anything that mattered, anything that could be hurt by the limits of his own fallibility. He had been wrong about himself for a decade. It had taken a woman at a broken gate, on a July morning in Kansas, to say 4 words that cut through 10 years of false accounting: fix whichever one you can. He had fixed the fence. He had fixed himself. And the two of them together had built something that outlasted the man who tried to take it, outlasted the summer that tried to break it, outlasted every voice that had ever looked at either of them and decided, prematurely and incorrectly, that what they were seeing was a thing already finished. The fence stood, not because nothing ever broke it. Fences break. That is the nature of fences, of winters, of Kansas storms that come from the southwest without warning and take down what was never built to last. The fence stood because every time it broke, someone who loved the land came out in the morning and fixed it. That is all a fence asks, one broken fence. One broken heart, one person willing to stay. And that is exactly how two people who had both been told they were too damaged, too flawed, too much of the wrong thing to deserve something whole, built the most solid, lasting, unapologetically real life that Larkspur County had ever had the privilege of watching. They built it post by post, year by year, and it held.